Every starter Pokemon begins as a quiet promise, something small and full of potential, standing at the edge of a world it has not yet seen. Each one was chosen not by accident, but by a design philosophy that considered how a creature should feel when held for the very first time. Tonight, we move slowly through that philosophy, resting with each starter long enough to understand what it truly is. And before you drift any further, consider subscribing for more calming journeys like this, and thank you for helping us gently approach 2,000 subscribers tonight. The world of starter Pokemon begins in Kanto, a region whose geography shaped everything that came after. Three creatures were selected to represent the beginning of a journey, and each one carried within its design a set of ideas about what a new trainer might need. Bulbasaur was the first in the numbered list, though not always the first chosen. Its placement was deliberate. Bulbasaur carries a seed structure on its back that is present from birth. This growth is not decorative. It is functional, absorbing sunlight and converting that energy into something the Pokemon can use throughout its life. The relationship between the plant and the creature beneath it is not one of host and parasite. It is something closer to partnership, two living things that developed together across generations. The seed on Bulbasaur's back is not the same as the bulb, though the two terms are sometimes used interchangeably. At the earliest stage, what grows from the Pokemon's back is a tightly closed bud, storing everything it will eventually become. That potential is sealed, waiting. As Bulbasaur grows, the bud swells slowly, responding to the accumulation of light and time. This makes Bulbasaur unusual among starter Pokemon because its most defining feature is not something it does, but something it carries. Charmander's tail flame burns with visible energy. Squirtle's shell is hard protection worn on the outside, but Bulbasaur's bulb is neither weapon nor armor. It is a living record of time spent growing. Bulbasaur's typing, grass and poison together, suggests that its origins lie somewhere between fertile ground and defended territory. Grass types in the Pokemon world tend to favor environments rich with soil and moisture. They are associated with patience, with rooting, with the kind of strength that comes from staying in one place long enough for that place to become familiar. Bulbasaur fits this profile. The poison typing layers something more complex beneath that calm surface. Poison in nature is rarely an offensive first resort. It is usually a message, a boundary drawn through biological language. Creatures that carry venom or toxic qualities are often signaling that approaching them carries cost. Bulbasaur communicates the same thing through its typing. Together, those two types create a Pokemon that is neither aggressive nor passive. It does not charge forward looking for conflict, but it does not retreat from it either. Bulbasaur holds its ground. It strengthens over time. It uses what it has absorbed rather than burning through reserves all at once. This is the kind of creature that rewards a trainer who thinks before acting. The early advantages Bulbasaur has against water-type and rock-type opponents in Kanto make it one of the more forgiving choices for a first journey. Those who chose it likely discovered patience before they discovered power, and that order of discovery shaped how they played. The Vine Whip that Bulbasaur uses in battle is one of its earliest and most natural expressions of control. The vines do not emerge from nowhere. They grow from the bulb on its back, extending outward with surprising speed and precision. They are not crude or blunt. They are capable of wrapping, pulling, restraining, and striking with a level of nuance that a simple tackle or scratch does not offer. This move teaches something about how Bulbasaur processes the world. Control over one's reach, the ability to extend and retract with purpose, is a different kind of strength than the kind that relies on impact alone. Bulbasaur learned early that the world beyond its immediate body was something it could interact with. That instinct toward reaching outward without leaving its own ground, became central to how it fights. The sleep powder and spore-based techniques that Bulbasaur can develop as it grows lean into a different quality, the ability to change the state of something without touching it directly. Releasing particles into the air that drift toward a target and alter its behavior is a deeply patient strategy. It requires waiting for conditions to be right. It requires trust that the effect will come. This again reflects something fundamental in Bulbasaur's character. It is willing to invest in outcomes that take time to manifest. The battle does not have to end immediately. The goal is not to overpower, but to outlast. Ivysaur is the second stage of this evolutionary line, and it represents the tipping point between potential and expression. The bud on its back has opened slightly, and the weight of that change is visible in how Ivysaur carries itself. Its legs are planted more firmly. Its center of gravity has shifted to accommodate the growing flower beginning to emerge. This middle stage just often receives less attention than Bulbasaur or Venusaur, but it holds something specific. Ivysaur is the moment between being a beginning and becoming something fully realized. The bud is no longer fully closed, but not yet in bloom. It is actively in the process of becoming. This state of transition is quietly powerful. The muscles around Ivysaur's legs and shoulders are visibly more developed than Bulbasaur's. Supporting the weight of what grows on its back requires constant low-level effort. Every step, every moment of standing contributes to the physical conditioning that Venusaur will eventually require. Ivysaur strengthens without noticing that it is strengthening, simply by continuing to carry what it carries. Many trainers who experience this middle stage closely find that Ivysaur has a particular steadiness about it. It does not seem to resent the weight it carries. It does not buckle beneath it. It adjusts, redistributes, and continues. There is something in that behavior worth sitting with for a moment before moving on. Venusaur is the final form of this line, and its presence communicates completion in a way that feels earned rather than sudden. The flower on its back has fully opened, deep pink petals surrounding a cluster of stamens that catch the light. The plant has bloomed, and in doing so it has made visible everything that was waiting inside since Bulbasaur's earliest days. Venusaur is heavy. Its design does not hide this. The flower weighs significantly, and Venusaur's broad, sturdy legs distribute that weight across a wide base. It moves slowly, not because it is weak, but because it has learned that slow movement is sufficient. The environment does not threaten something this well anchored. The scent that Venusaur's flower produces is described in various sources as calming to those who encounter it. This is not a weapon in the traditional sense. It is an environmental quality, a presence that alters the mood of a space simply by being within it. This fits perfectly with the philosophy that began with Bulbasaur. Influence does not always require force. Venusaur also generates energy for other Pokémon around it through the biological processes of its flower. In certain settings, it acts less like a fighter and more like an anchor, a creature whose continued health and stability benefits those near it. The entire evolutionary line builds toward this kind of quiet, distributed strength. Charmander entered the world as a creature defined by its contradiction. It is small, with short arms and a round face that reads as approachable, but the flame on the tip of its tail burns from the moment of birth, a continuous signal that something within this creature is always active. This fire is not decorative. It is vital. The flame on Charmander's tail is tied directly to its life force in ways that go beyond metaphor. If that flame is extinguished, the consequences are immediate and serious. This dependency on a visible, external source of vitality creates a creature that cannot afford to be ignored. Something about Charmander always asks for attention, not because it demands it through behavior, but because the nature of its biology makes tending to it feel necessary. This is a different starting experience than Bulbasaur offers. Where Bulbasaur's growth is quiet and self-managed, Charmander's requires the trainer to be aware. The flame must stay burning. The weather matters. Cold rain poses a kind of danger that has nothing to do with type matchups or battle mechanics. It is simply an environmental reality that shapes how Charmander is cared for. This vulnerability creates a bond between trainer and Pokémon that forms through attentiveness. The trainer who notices the flame, who adjusts based on what the flame communicates, is learning to pay attention in a very specific way. That attention becomes the foundation of a different kind of partnership than the one Bulbasaur offers. Charmander's fire typing positions it within one of the most temperamentally expressive categories in the Pokémon world. Fire types are often described as having strong feelings that match their elemental nature. They are enthusiastic, bold, and capable of intense focus when engaged. Charmander, in particular, is described as having a warm-natured personality that mirrors the literal warmth it produces. But what makes Charmander interesting is not just its warmth. It is the intensity beneath that warmth. The fire on its tail burns brighter when Charmander feels strongly about something. This visible emotional expression is unusual. Most creatures in the natural world conceal their internal states. Charmander expresses this directly, involuntarily, through heat and light. This means that understanding Charmander is partly a matter of observing it, rather than simply commanding it. The brightness of the tail communicates what the Pokémon does not say. Trainers who learn to read this signal gain access to a depth of understanding that goes beyond the usual vocabulary of moves and items. The fire that Charmander carries is not uniform in temperature. As it develops, it burns hotter. This is not simply a matter of quantity, more fire making more heat, but of a qualitative change in the nature of the flame. The fire that Charizard eventually produces is structurally different from the small, steady flame on Charmander's tail. One is a beginning, the other is something that has been refined through growth. Charmeleon occupies the difficult middle ground of this line. The transition from Charmander's warmth to Charmeleon's harder edge is one of the most discussed personality shifts in the history of starter Pokémon. Charmeleon is not simply a larger Charmander. It has become something more difficult, more independent, and more demanding. The horns that appear on Charmeleon's head are a clear visual signal that something has shifted. The round approachability of Charmander has been replaced by sharper lines. The tail flame burns differently now, with a quality that suggests purpose rather than simply presence. Charmeleon has not lost the fire. It has learned to lean into it. This stage requires a trainer who is willing to meet growth with growth. Charmeleon does not respond to the same gentle attentiveness that worked with Charmander. It needs to feel that its trainer is capable, that the person guiding it has something worth following. The mutual dependence that was warmly one-directional in Charmander's stage has become a negotiation. Many trainers who chose Charmander describe the Charmeleon phase as the true test of the bond they built. The journey does not simply get harder in terms of opponents. It gets more internally complex. The partner is no longer simply receiving care. It is evaluating whether the care it has received has prepared it for what comes next. Charizard is perhaps the most recognized fire-type starter evolution in the franchise's history, and its design carries a weight proportional to that recognition. The wings that appear at this stage were not present in either previous form. They arrive at the final evolution as something newly possible, something the creature could not do before, and now does naturally. Flight represents a particular kind of freedom in the Pokémon world. The ability to leave the ground, to move through an entirely different medium, expands what is accessible. Charizard's wings are not decorative. They change what this Pokémon can do and where it can be. The addition of wings to the evolutionary line is a statement about what this creature was always building toward. The fire and flying type combination of Charizard is notable because it changes the weaknesses in significant ways. Rock type moves become a fourfold weakness, meaning that the element most associated with stability and endurance is precisely what this creature must guard against. This is not a design flaw, it is a design philosophy. Charizard is extraordinary in what it can do and specific in what it must avoid. The temperature of Charizard's flame is described as capable of melting dense materials under the right conditions. This is a very different claim than the warmth that characterized Charmander. The fire has matured through the evolutionary process into something qualitatively transformed, but the fundamental nature, a fire that began the moment Charmander drew its first breath, is unchanged. Squirtle arrived in Kanto as the third starter choice, the water-type companion to fire and grass, and its design communicated something different from its counterparts. The shell on its back is immediately visible and immediately functional. Squirtle is a creature that came into the world already carrying protection. This is not armor that was aided over time. The shell is part of Squirtle's body in the same fundamental way that Bulbasaur's bulb is part of its biology. But where the bulb stores and grows, the shell defends and conceals. These are very different orientations toward the world. The bulb faces outward and accumulates. The shell curves inward and protects. Squirtle's round shape, the dome of its shell, its slightly oversized head relative to its body, all of these contribute to an appearance that reads as contained. Everything about Squirtle suggests that it knows where its boundaries are. It does not reach past them unnecessarily. It occupies a specific, defined space and manages that space with care. Water in the natural world accumulates in low places. It finds the path of least resistance. It does not impose, but it does persist. Squirtle's water typing connects it to this quality. The creature is adaptable in a physical sense, moving through water with a comfort that land requires effort to match. In its preferred medium, Squirtle is at home in a way that is difficult to replicate elsewhere. The squirt in Squirtle's name is not accidental. This creature uses water offensively, directing streams with precision rather than force. The jets of water Squirtle produces are accurate enough to serve as a tool as much as a weapon. Squirtle can put out fires, clear paths, and communicate through its water in ways that extend well beyond battle. This precision is reflected in how Squirtle carries itself. It is observant. It does not act immediately when something changes in its environment. It watches, it assesses, then it responds. This methodical quality makes Squirtle slower to warm up but reliable once it commits. In what it decides to do, it does with full attention. The shell provides practical advantages in battle beyond simple protection. Squirtle can withdraw into it, reducing the surface area available to an opponent and buying time to reassess a situation. This tactical option is not often available to other starter Pokémon. Charmander cannot retreat into itself. Bulbasaur cannot close off its outer presence. Squirtle can, and the ability to do so changes how it approaches danger. Squirtle groups have been described in various sources as having a social culture built around collaboration. They share lookout responsibilities, pool resources, and maintain group cohesion through behaviors that reinforce collective safety. This social orientation mirrors Bulbasaur's group tendencies in some ways, but differs in its emphasis. Bulbasaur groups move together. Squirtle groups organize together. Wartortle marks the transition into something older and more deliberate. The ears and tail that become more prominent in this stage are not simply visual additions. They contribute to Wartortle's sensory experience, helping it detect changes in its environment with greater sensitivity. A Wartortle is more alert than a Squirtle, not because it has more reason to be afraid, but because it has learned to pay attention. The swirl pattern on Wartortle's tail carries a specific association in the context of this evolutionary line. Spirals appear across the natural world in places where growth and time intersect. In shells themselves, in the cross-section of a log, in the shape of galaxies observed from far away. The pattern on Wartortle's tail suggests that what this creature carries is old knowledge, accumulated over many years. Wartortle is described in some sources as living to very great ages, with the size and fluffiness of its tail indicating how long an individual has lived. This detail reframes the entire evolutionary line, where Charmander's flame suggests urgency and Bulbasaur's bulb suggests growth and progress. Wartortle's tail is a record of time already spent. Age becomes visible in a way it is not for most Pokémon. This longevity connects to Squirtle's careful, observant nature. A creature that lives for a very long time has reason to be patient. There is no need to rush. The world will present its opportunities and its dangers in due course. Waiting to understand a situation before responding is not hesitation. It is wisdom developed over many years. Blastoise completes this evolutionary line with a kind of architectural transformation. The cannons that emerge from its shell are among the most dramatic visual additions in any starter evolution. They change what Blastoise is capable of in an immediate, obvious way, but they also change what Blastoise communicates simply by existing. The cannons are not additions to Blastoise's body in the way that equipment might be added to a person. They are part of its evolved anatomy, emerging from within the shell as natural extensions of what Wartortle's form was already developing toward. They belong to Blastoise in the same way that Venusaur's flower belongs to that creature, as the expression of everything that was stored and building since the first stage. Water pressure is the principle underlying Blastoise's offensive capability. The water jets it produces are not simply large. They are compressed, focused, and delivered with a force that changes their physical impact significantly. A stream of water at sufficient pressure can cut through solid materials. Blastoise's attacks operate at a scale that communicates this potential directly. What is easy to overlook about Blastoise is the self-possession its design communicates. The cannons are prominent, but Blastoise does not appear aggressive. Its expressions in most depictions is calm, even slightly serious, in the manner of something that does not need to perform its strength, because that strength is simply apparent. The power is present. There is no need to display it unnecessarily. The second generation of starter Pokémon arrived in Johto, a region designed to feel older than Kanto, more rooted in tradition and in a deeper relationship between humans and Pokémon. The starters chosen for Johto reflected this ethos. Chikorita, Cyndaquil, and Totodile each carried qualities that connected them to something ancient in the way that Pokémon and people relate to one another. Chikorita is the grass-type starter of this generation, and it approaches the category from a different angle than Bulbasaur, where Bulbasaur carries something on its back that is growing separately alongside it. Chikorita grows from itself. The leaf on its head is part of its body, emerging from the crown of its head as a single, large, expressive leaf with its own responsive qualities. This leaf can detect temperature and humidity. It is both a sensory organ and a signal. When Chikorita senses something pleasant, the leaf moves. When the air is comfortable, the scent that drifts from the leaf becomes more prominent. This makes Chikorita's relationship to its environment communicative in a direction that Bulbasaur's is not. Bulbasaur absorbs and accumulates. Chikorita responds and signals. The necklace-like buds that ring Chikorita's neck add to its visual vocabulary. These buds release a calming fragrance that has been described as having a soothing effect on both Pokémon and humans nearby. This is not an offensive ability. It is a quality of presence that makes the area around Chikorita gentler. This is consistent with how Chikorita is most often characterized, as a starter that offers something nurturing rather than dominant. Chikorita's affectionate nature is one of its most documented qualities. It bonds deeply with trainers who reciprocate its warmth, and it is notably sensitive to whether it feels truly valued. This sensitivity can make it seem demanding in comparison to the more self-contained Bulbasaur, but the relationship it offers in return for genuine care is distinct. Chikorita does not simply follow, it belongs. The protective instinct that Chikorita develops toward those it trusts is documented across various sources. When something threatens a person or Pokémon it has bonded with, Chikorita does not retreat. It positions itself between the threat and whoever it is defending. This behavior is not trained into it. It emerges naturally from the depth of the bond. In battle, Chikorita favors a style built on sustained pressure and support. It can reduce the accuracy of opponents, apply status conditions, and restore health over time, all strategies that extend rather than end confrontations quickly. This matches its temperament. Chikorita plays long games, building advantages gradually while maintaining the well-being of its side. The leaf on its head, while it can function as a physical weapon, is better understood as a tool of expression and sensing. Chikorita's most effective moments in battle often come not from raw strikes, but from the subtle shifts it creates in conditions. A small advantage maintained across many turns eventually becomes decisive. Chikorita understands this intuitively. Bayleaf carries the transition from Chikorita's warmth into something with more distinct edges. The small buds around its neck have grown into a ring of leaves, and something in the arrangement of those leaves shifts the creature's overall silhouette. Bayleaf looks more capable of directing its energy outward, more interested in the space beyond its immediate body. The scent that emerges from Bayleaf's leaves is described as sharper and more invigorating than Chikorita's calming fragrance. It stimulates rather than soothes. This change mirrors the energy of a middle evolutionary stage, something that has moved past the gentleness of beginning without yet arriving at the settled strength of completion. Bayleaf's movements tend to be more assertive than Chikorita's. It has developed confidence in its own strength and begins to express that confidence through how it occupies space. This is still a fundamentally good-natured creature, but the softness of early Chikorita has given way to something more direct. The affection is still present. It is simply expressed differently now. The leaf attached to Bayleaf's head has lengthened, and the plant bud emerging from within that leaf has developed further. This layered growth, leaf containing bud containing the potential for more leaf, communicates that the evolutionary process is still proceeding. The growth happening inside Bayleaf is not visible until it becomes Meganium, but it is continuously occurring. Meganium arrives as one of the gentlest-looking final evolutions in the starter lineup. The flowers that encircle its neck are large, pink, and prominently beautiful in a way that immediately communicates something about this creature's role. Meganium is not primarily a fighter, though it can fight. It is a presence that affects the health and vitality of those near it. The pollen that Meganium's flowers release has documented restorative effects on other Pokémon. In natural settings, Meganium is described as a creature that other Pokémon seek out, particularly when injured or exhausted. Its presence alone can begin the process of restoration. This is a highly unusual quality for a creature that begins its life as a starter, chosen for someone's first journey. Meganium does not have the defensive architecture of Blastoise or the offensive power of Charizard or Typhlosion. Its strength lies in an area that standard battle metrics do not easily capture: the ability to sustain and restore. In prolonged encounters or in conditions where endurance matters more than immediate power, Meganium excels. The breath that Meganium releases carries properties similar to the pollen from its flowers. It is warm and fragrant, and it promotes growth and healing in the environment it touches. This connection between breath and botanical life is unique in the starter lineup. Meganium's body is a living greenhouse, and the space it occupies benefits from its continued presence in it. Cyndaquil is the fire-type starter of Johto, and it carries its fire in a very different way than Charmander. The flames do not burn from a tail, but from a collection of openings along the Pokemon's back, and they are not always burning. Cyndaquil, in a calm state, has no visible fire. The openings on its back are simply there, small ports that have not yet been activated. This resting state is one of Cyndaquil's most distinctive qualities. When calm, it looks almost like a small, harmless creature with no obvious capacity for heat or power. When threatened or roused, the flames ignite instantly, transforming its appearance and communicating its capability without any transition period. The shift is immediate and complete. This on and off relationship with its own fire makes a Cyndaquil something of an interior creature. Where Charmander's flame is always there, always visible, always part of how it is perceived, Cyndaquil's fire is held in reserve. It is something that comes out when needed. This does not mean the fire is less important. It means that Cyndaquil has learned or was born knowing how to keep it contained. The timid quality that Cyndaquil is often described as having connects to this interior nature. It is not that Cyndaquil lacks confidence. It is that Cyndaquil tends to evaluate a situation before deciding what to reveal about itself. The flames emerge when the evaluation is complete. Until then, what you see is a small creature moving quietly through the world. Cyndaquil's fighting style, once it has decided to engage, is built on bursts rather than sustained output. The flames it produces are intense but directed, focused into concentrated releases that apply pressure in specific moments rather than burning constantly. This burst-based approach requires good timing and the willingness to wait for the right moment. This patience, the ability to hold the fire until the conditions are correct, distinguishes Cyndaquil and its evolutions from other fire starters. Charmander burns continuously and visibly. Cyndaquil reserves and releases. These are fundamentally different relationships with the same element, and they produce fundamentally different creatures from the same starting material. The speed that Cyndaquil develops as it grows is notable. Despite its rounded, unhurried appearance, Cyndaquil can move quickly when it chooses to. This speed is connected to the burst mentality of its fire. The creature concentrates energy and releases it in specific moments, and this applies to movement as well as flame. It builds toward an action and executes it sharply. The heat that Cyndaquil generates, when frightened or surprised, is involuntary, the flames spiking without intention. This tells something about the relationship between emotion and fire in this creature's biology. The fire is connected to internal states in a way that cannot be fully controlled. Strong feelings produce strong flames, regardless of the situation's tactical context. Quilava represents the moment when Cyndaquil's reserved quality develops into something more self-assured. The flames along its back burn more steadily in this form, though they still respond dramatically to emotional states. Quilava's posture has shifted, a lower stance that communicates readiness and attention rather than the slightly hunched defensiveness of earlier. The body of Quilava is built for agility. It is longer relative to its height, giving it a profile that suggests the ability to move quickly and change direction with precision. This form is not the most powerful stage of the line, but it is arguably the most balanced, capable enough to be dangerous, while still lean enough to be fast. The fire that Quilava controls has become more expressive. Where Cyndaquil's flames were somewhat abrupt in their emergence, Quilava's fire shows more gradation. It can sustain a moderate burn rather than simply switching between nothing and full intensity. This expanded range gives Quilava more tactical vocabulary in how it uses heat. Quilava develops a reputation in various sources for being particularly observant of its environment. It scans surroundings continuously, not from anxiety, but from a habit of awareness. This observational quality leads to a battle style that capitalizes on openings rather than forcing them. Quilava waits, sees the moment, and moves with precision when the moment arrives. Typhlosion is one of the most powerful final forms in the Johto starter lineup, and its design communicates this through restraint rather than ornamentation. It is broad, upright, and relatively simple in form, with the collar of fire that frames its neck and upper back providing the primary visual signal of what it carries within. The fire that Typhlosion generates reaches temperatures that cause distortion in the air around it, a shimmer that makes objects near the flame appear to vibrate. This effect is visible without requiring direct contact with the fire itself. The heat radiates outward, changing the immediate environment in a passive way that communicates Typhlosion's capability before any attack is made. This passive communication through environmental effect is shared with Venusaur's flowering and Meganium's restoration, but it is different in quality. The flower and the pollen create gentleness. Typhlosion's heat shimmer creates pressure. The space around it is warmer than it should be, and anything sensitive to heat would know before engaging that this creature has significant thermal capacity. Typhlosion's character is described as quick to anger, but also capable of intense focus. The combination of speed and heat in this final form makes it effective in aggressive strategies, but the interior quality that began in Cyndaquil is still present. Typhlosion still waits for the moment. The fire burns hotter now, and the moment it chooses is harder to recover from. Totodile arrived in Johto as the water-type starter, and it came carrying an energy that immediately distinguished it from Squirtle's careful observation. Totodile is enthusiastic. It is active. Its jaw is its most prominent feature, large relative to its body and visibly capable, and its general bearing communicates willingness rather than watchfulness. Where Squirtle observes before acting, Totodile tends to act and observe the results. This is not recklessness in the standard sense. Totodile understands its own capabilities well enough to engage with confidence. The jaw that makes it visually striking is backed by genuine biting power that Totodile has likely tested on many things in its environment before encountering a trainer. The playfulness that Totodile is often described as having is real, but should not be taken to mean that it is not serious. Totodile plays with the full intensity of a creature that uses physical engagement as its primary mode of learning about the world. Its enthusiasm in play mirrors its approach to conflict. Both are entered with the same energy and commitment. This energetic quality makes Totodile a more demanding early companion than Chikorita or Cyndaquil in different ways. It requires engagement. It needs activity and interaction. A Totodile left to itself in a calm environment will find its own stimulation, and what it chooses to stimulate itself with may not always be what its trainer would prefer. The water that Totodile controls is not the careful, directed stream of Squirtle's design. It is more forceful, more directly expressed, closer to the crashing, churning quality of moving water than to the precise application of stored pressure. Totodile's water attacks tend toward the broad rather than the targeted, reflecting its general orientation toward engagement over precision. This approach evolves as the evolutionary line progresses, but the fundamental character remains. Croconaw, the middle stage, channels Totodile's energy through a body that has grown significantly, particularly around the jaw and upper body. The teeth that Croconaw develops are notably replaceable, lost and regrown continuously as the creature bites into things throughout its life. This constant renewal of its most important tool reflects the active nature of this entire line. Feraligatr is the final form, and it brings Totodile's enthusiastic directness to its full physical expression. The body of Feraligatr is large and powerful in a way that makes its movement through water significantly different from the creature it began as. Where Totodile moves with quick, slightly chaotic energy, Feraligatr moves with the deliberate force of something that knows its own mass. The shift from Totodile's quick excitement to Feraligatr's measured power mirrors the development that happens across all evolutionary lines, but with a particular flavor here. The enthusiasm is still present in Feraligatr, visible in the speed with which it can launch itself from water and in the aggression of its approach. But that enthusiasm is now housed in a form that amplifies it into something qualitatively more serious. The third generation of starter Pokémon brought the world into the Hoenn region, a place defined by its water roots, its volcanic landscapes, and its sense of natural abundance. Treecko, Torchic, and Mudkip each carried something of that regional character within their designs, connecting elemental identity to the specific environment that would surround them. Treecko is the grass-type starter of Hoenn, and its relationship to plant life is expressed not through carrying a plant or growing one, but through the architecture of its own body. The pads on Treecko's feet contain microscopic hooks that allow it to grip surfaces with remarkable precision. It can cling to walls and ceilings. The plant is not something Treecko carries. Treecko moves through the plant environment as if it belongs to it. This climbing ability gives Treecko a relationship with vertical space that other grass-type starters do not share. Where Bulbasaur and Chikorita are fundamentally grounded creatures, low and stable, Treecko can move upward. It occupies the canopy as naturally as the forest floor. This expanded relationship with its environment is reflected in how it perceives threats and opportunities. The coolness that Treecko is often described as having, a kind of calm that reads as confidence, connects to this freedom of movement. A creature that can go anywhere in its environment, that has no restricted zones, does not need to worry in the same way that a creature tied to a specific level of space might. Treecko's composure comes partly from the security of knowing it can leave the ground whenever it chooses. Treecko's tail is thick and provides balance in a way that enables the quick, precise movements its climbing lifestyle requires. The tail is not simply structural. It is expressive in ways that Treecko's otherwise cool demeanor does not typically make visible. How it holds the tail, the angle and tension, communicates internal states that the rest of its body conceals. The competitive quality that Treecko is noted for extends into how it chooses its battles. It does not avoid conflict. It evaluates conflict, finds the version that it can win, and engages with full commitment. This selectivity is not cowardice. It is the behavior of a creature that has learned to distinguish between challenges worth taking and challenges that offer nothing useful. Speed is Treecko's primary physical attribute. It is not the most durable starter choice at its base stage, and it is not the hardest hitter. But it is fast, and that speed translates into a style of engagement that keeps opponents reactive, rather than proactive. Treecko dictates pace. This is a significant advantage for a creature whose other statistics are more moderate. The competitive drive that Treecko maintains makes it a starter that grows through challenge rather than through care in the way that Chikorita does. Treecko responds to being tested. It elevates when the situation demands elevation. Trainers who push Treecko appropriately find that it meets those pushes and often exceeds them. Grovyle is the middle stage of this line, and it represents the point where Treecko's potential speed has become realized speed. The leaf blades that grow from Grovyle's arms are new developments in this form, adding an offensive capability that Treecko's quick limbs suggested but did not fully express. Grovyle can move through dense foliage so quickly that the rustle it creates in leaves and branches is often the only sign it has passed through a space. This quality, being present without being easily perceived, is part of what makes Grovyle distinctly its own stage, rather than simply a larger Treecko. The ability to move through an environment without fully announcing oneself changes what is possible in terms of positioning and timing. Grovyle can be where it needs to be before opponents understand where it was. The leaf blades allow for close quarters engagement that Treecko's unarmed style did not support as effectively. This adds a dimension to the evolutionary line's fighting approach, combining the speed-based disruption of Treecko with a cutting edge that makes Grovyle genuinely dangerous at close range. Speed and proximity become a combination rather than alternatives. Grovyle's behavior in the wild is described as nearly solitary. Unlike the group dynamics of some other starter Pokémon in their natural states, Grovyle tends toward independence. It establishes its territory clearly, communicates its presence through the sounds it makes in the canopy, and manages that territory through active patrol. This independence is another expression of the self-sufficiency that the entire line embodies. Sceptile is the final form of this evolutionary line, and it achieves something unusual in how it presents power. The seeds that line Sceptile's back are not simply decorative. They are highly nutritious, full of condensed biological energy, and they are continuously produced and shed. Sceptile does not hoard what it generates. It releases it, and in doing so, it nourishes the environment it moves through. The tail of Sceptile has split into a structure of leaf blades that can be used offensively in battle, but more often communicate the creature's state to those who know how to read it. The blades angle and shift in ways that Grovyle's single leaf shapes did not. This expanded expressive vocabulary fits with Sceptile's role as the fully realized version of this evolutionary line. Sceptile can purify bodies of water and promote the health of forests simply through its extended presence. This ecological quality connects it to Venusaur and Meganium in the role they play in natural settings, as anchors of health for the environments they inhabit. But where those creatures anchor through stability, Sceptile anchors through movement. It ranges through its territory, and the territory is healthier for that ranging. The speed that defined Treecko's potential is fully expressed in Sceptile. It is described as one of the fastest grass-type Pokémon, capable of matching creatures that have built their entire identities around movement. This speed, combined with the cutting capability of its tail blades and the ecological role it plays, makes Sceptile a complete expression of what this evolutionary line was building toward. Torchic is the fire-type starter of Hoenn, and it arrives in a package that seems intentionally designed to conceal what it contains. It looks like a small, fluffy bird. It is warm to the touch. It makes sounds that are soft and somewhat plaintive. Nothing about Torchic's external presentation suggests that inside its body burns a flame that heats its interior to extreme temperatures. This concealment is not strategic in the way that Cyndaquil's reserved fire might be. Torchic does not choose to appear harmless. It is simply what it is, a small bird that also happens to generate intense internal heat. The gap between what Torchic looks like and what Torchic is creates something interesting in its relationship with trainers. Those who choose Torchic based on its soft appearance discover very quickly that this creature has more intensity than its surface communicates. The fire inside it is real, and it expresses itself in battle in ways that surprise trainers who expected something gentle. This is not a betrayal of what Torchic is. It is simply the full picture, presented in order, first warmth, then heat. Torchic's dependence on warmth is genuine rather than performed. It dislikes cold environments and will seek warmth actively when temperatures drop. This creates a specific dynamic between Torchic and its trainer, one where the trainer's body heat and proximity provide genuine comfort. Being held by a trainer is not merely pleasant for Torchic. In cold conditions, it is meaningful. The fire sac inside Torchic's body is described as producing flames that can be released in various ways, through the beak primarily, but also as an ambient heat that makes the air immediately around the Pokémon noticeably warmer. This ambient quality is what makes Torchic feel warm to hold. It is not simply body temperature. It is a continuous small release of stored heat into the surrounding space. This feature makes Torchic unusual among fire-type starters because the fire is internal rather than external, where Charmander's flame is visible and Cyndaquil's ignites on the outside of its body. Torchic's fire lives inside. The external warmth is a secondary expression of something that originates deeper within. This inside quality connects to the gap mentioned before, the distance between surface appearance and internal reality. As Torchic develops toward its first evolution, the intensity of the internal fire increases along with the physical changes that alter its body shape. The fluffy roundness begins to give way to something leaner, more angular, more expressive of movement potential. The fire inside is pushing outward against the form it was given, beginning to reshape what contains it. Combustion, the middle stage, is visually striking in how completely it changes the reading of this evolutionary line. The softness is gone. What replaced it is a creature that looks like it is always ready, always slightly in motion, always measuring the distance between itself and the nearest thing worth engaging with. Combustion's fire is no longer fully internal in the way that Torchic's was. It now manifests at the wrists and lower legs in ways that enhance the physical strikes this form favors. The combination of fire and fighting that this middle stage embodies is not simply a type addition. It is a statement about what this evolutionary line is moving toward, a synthesis of heat and martial capability. The voice that Combustion produces is notably powerful for a creature of its size. It can release a cry sharp enough to paralyze opponents briefly, not through fear in the simple sense, but through sheer sonic impact. This capability arrived at this stage rather than earlier or later, suggesting that finding one's voice, learning to project strength outward with force, is part of this particular evolutionary moment. Blaziken is the final form. In its arrival completed something that was only suggested by Torchic's humble beginning. The long legs, the flame-wreathed wrists, the sharp-featured head, the upright posture, all of these combine into something that communicates athletic excellence. Blaziken is built for movement, specifically for the kind of movement that combines speed and impact. The flame that Blaziken produces at its wrists during battle intensifies the impact of its physical strikes by adding thermal force to kinetic force. A kick from Blaziken carries both the momentum of its body and the addition of concentrated heat. These two forces amplify each other in ways that make the total impact more significant than either component would be alone. Mudkip arrived as the water-type starter of Hoenn, and it carried something in its design that immediately set it apart from Squirtle and Totodile. The fin on its head is a sensory organ connected to the lateral line system that fish and some amphibians use to detect water pressure and vibrations. Mudkip senses its environment through physical disturbances that other creatures cannot perceive. This gives Mudkip access to environmental information that is simply not available through the senses that most creatures rely on. Changes in water current, the approach of a large body through nearby water, the specific pattern of ripples created by different movements, all of this is available to Mudkip through its head fin in a way that supplements and sometimes replaces visual and auditory information. The practical result is a creature that is rarely caught fully off guard in its natural environment. Mudkip in or near water is extraordinarily aware of what is happening around it. This awareness is the foundation of a calm confidence that might otherwise seem puzzling for a small starter Pokémon. Mudkip does not need to watch for danger in the way that purely visual creatures do. It feels danger approaching. The combination of this sensory capability with Mudkip's physical strength, greater relative to its body size than most starters at this stage, creates a creature that can manage situations more complex than it initially appears equipped for. The fin on its head is not decorative. It is the key to understanding why Mudkip is as capable as it is. Mudkip's water typing is complemented by a ground typing that manifests fully in its final evolution, but is visible in tendency from the beginning. Mudkip is as comfortable on land as in water, moving between the two environments, with ease that neither Squirtle nor Totodile quite matches. This amphibious quality is not simply a geographic trait. It is a fundamental aspect of how this creature understands and navigates its world. The mud that gives Mudkip its name is the medium where these two environments meet. Mud is neither purely water nor purely earth. It is the place where the two have combined, where each has contributed something of itself to a substance that shares qualities with both. Mudkip thrives in this in-between space, and there is something in that preference that speaks to a creature comfortable with gradation rather than demanding categories. Marshtomp, the middle stage, develops the ground-type aspect more fully, while retaining the water capability that Mudkip expressed. The body of Marshtomp is more solid, its legs more defined and powerful. It moves through mud and shallow water with a sureness that communicates how completely at home it is in these conditions. What others might find difficult terrain, Marshtomp finds familiar ground. Swampert is the final form, and it brings this evolutionary line to a conclusion that expresses formidable physical power alongside the sensory awareness that began with Mudkip's head fin. The body of Swampert is broad and strongly built, its arms capable of moving large boulders with relative ease. This physical strength, combined with the sensory capabilities of the entire line, creates a creature that is both enormously capable and extraordinarily aware. The fourth generation of starter Pokémon came with the Sinnoh region, a place of northern cold, ancient mythology, and a sense that the world beneath the one we see has its own rules and its own older stories. The starters of Sinnoh, Turtwig, Chimchar, and Piplup each carried elements of that regional character in their designs and in the qualities attributed to them. Turtwig is the grass-type starter of Sinnoh, and it brings something to the starter lineup that no previous grass type had expressed so directly. The soil on Turtwig's shell, which appears to be part of its body rather than simply attached to it, is produced by the Pokemon's own metabolism. As Turtwig processes sunlight, the biological byproduct is this hardened soil, which forms and reforms over time on the surface of its shell. This means that Turtwig's shell is not simply protection. It is a record of its own biological activity, a layer of history that the creature produces and carries. The shell of a Turtwig that has spent many years in healthy sunlit environments will show in its composition. The quality of the soil reflects the quality of the life that produced it. The sprout growing from Turtwig's head is a separate plant from the creature itself in a technical sense, but the relationship between them is symbiotic in much the same way as Bulbasaur's bulb. The sprout draws water through Turtwig's body, accessing moisture that the creature absorbs from the ground through its feet. In times of dehydration, the sprout wilts, providing a visible external signal of the creature's condition. Turtwig's physical form communicates stability in the clearest possible visual terms. It is square and dense, with a weight distribution that makes it very difficult to knock off balance. Its legs are short and stout. Its head is held low relative to its shell. Everything about its shape says that this creature is in contact with the ground, anchored to it in a fundamental way. This stability translates into a battling approach built on endurance and gradual accumulation of advantage. Turtwig is not going to outpace opponents. It is going to outlast them, absorbing what it must and applying steady pressure in return. The leaf on its head can harden, adding an additional layer to its defensive capability through the razor leaf techniques it develops. The connection to the earth that Turtwig maintains through its feet is not simply a mechanical feature. It is described in some sources as genuinely refreshing to the creature, a direct replenishment that contact with soil provides. Turtwig removed from natural ground for extended periods shows signs of stress that contact with earth resolves. It does not simply prefer natural environments, it draws from them directly. Turtwig's evolution into Grottle and eventually Torterra develops this earth connection into something grander. Grottle already shows trees beginning to grow on its back, small but established, rooted in the same hardened soil that began with Turtwig's shell. These trees are not symbolic, they are alive, drawing nutrients from the creature's biology, contributing to its overall vitality in return. Torterra is the final stage of this evolutionary line, and it achieves something genuinely remarkable in the context of starter Pokémon. Other Pokémon in the world have been compared to islands or mountains, but Torterra makes this comparison concrete. The ecosystem on its back is not decoration. It is a functioning natural community, small trees, their undergrowth, creatures that live within it, all sustained by Torterra's continued existence. The mythology associated with Torterra in Sinnoh connects this directly to ancient beliefs about the nature of the world. Sinnoh's culture is built on stories of origin, of how the land and sea and sky came to be what they are. Torterra, carrying its own small world, becomes a living echo of those creation stories. What moves beneath the earth might be something like Torterra, vast and ancient, and simply walking its long, slow path. The grass and ground typing that Torterra carries is perfectly matched to its role. Grass for the living ecosystem on its back, ground for the earthen stability of its body, and its deep connection to the soil beneath it. These types work together in Torterra in a way that feels less like a type combination and more like a description of what the creature simply is. The weight of Torterra is significant and well distributed across legs, built to carry it for a very long time. Torterra does not need to be fast. It does not need to be aggressive. It needs to continue. The ecosystem on its back depends on its continued movement and continued health. Torterra endures because more than its own life depends on that endurance. Chimchar is the fire-type starter of Sinnoh, and it carries its fire in a way specific to this particular creature. The flame that burns at the tip of Chimchar's tail originates in a gas that Chimchar produces internally, generated by the bacteria that live in its digestive system. This means that Chimchar's fire is a product of its own biological processes in a way that is quite different from most fire-type starters. This biological origin of the flame means that Chimchar's fire does not extinguish the way Charmander's would in rain or cold. The internal production of the flame's fuel continues regardless of external conditions. Chimchar can maintain its fire in storms, in cold, and in conditions that would threaten external flames. The fire is generated from within, which makes it reliably present. Chimchar moves with the agility characteristic of its primate inspiration, using its hands and feet with equal facility to navigate complex environments. It is a climber, like Treecko, but its climbing is less calculated and more instinctive. Where Treecko moves through the canopy with cool assessment, Chimchar moves through it with the quick opportunism of a creature that has always lived among branches. The social quality that Chimchar expresses connects to the group behaviors of primates more broadly. It is attentive to the states of those around it, responsive to emotional cues, and capable of forming strong bonds quickly. This social sensitivity makes Chimchar's relationship with its trainer warm in a way that develops rapidly compared to more independent starters. Monferno, the middle stage, develops the fire aspect of this evolutionary line in a direction that emphasizes performance alongside power. The rings of fire that appear around Monferno's body are used tactically in battle, extending reach, controlling spacing, and adding visual disruption to its already agile movement. These fire rings are not simply larger flames, they are a tool. The martial quality that the fighting type brings to Monferno's capabilities is expressed through how it moves. The acrobatic style that Chimchar's agility suggested is formalized here into something more deliberate and more effective. Monferno does not simply move quickly, it moves in ways that create openings and deny them simultaneously. Infernape is the final form, and it represents a synthesis of speed, fire, and fighting capability that few other starters achieve. The flame burning on the top of Infernape's head is a constant presence, connected to the same biological process that generated Chimchar's tail flame, but now manifesting at the crown as something that communicates both heat and focus. The movement style of Infernape is described as borrowing from multiple martial traditions, incorporating the fluidity of styles that emphasize continuous motion alongside the explosive capability of styles focused on decisive impact. This combination makes Infernape difficult to anticipate because it does not commit to a single mode of movement. It flows between them, and the fire flows with it. Piplup arrives as the water-type starter of Sinnoh, and we have already spent time with its character and its deep sense of self-assurance. But there is more within this creature that deserves quiet attention in this evening's exploration. The waters of Sinnoh are cold. The northern geography of this region creates a sea conditions that most creatures would find challenging. Piplup inhabits these waters naturally, diving for food in water temperatures that would disable creatures without the specific biological adaptations that make such diving possible. Its thick down and the layer of fat beneath it serve as insulation against temperatures that the surrounding region makes routine. This cold water capability is visible in Piplup's coloration and texture. The blue of its body is not decorative in origin. It is the visual expression of the biological toolkit that allows it to function where the water is cold and the food requires diving to reach. Every design element serves the environment in which Piplup actually lives. The pride that characterizes Piplup is partly earned through this capability. It survives in conditions that are genuinely difficult. Its refusal to be patronized or coddled makes more sense when understood in the context of the environment that shaped it. Something that has made peace with cold northern seas does not need to be handled gently. Empoleon, the final stage of this evolutionary line, carries the steel typing that arrives with its evolution from Prinplup, and this typing expresses something important about what this evolutionary line ultimately becomes. Steel is the type of structure, of constructed strength, of something that has been forged rather than simply grown or burned. The steel in Empoleon's typing is reflected in the metallic qualities of its crown-like crest and in the hardness of its body compared to Piplup's softer form. Something in the evolutionary process has not simply grown Piplup larger, but has introduced a qualitative change in the physical substance of the creature itself. This is not simply a bigger Piplup. It is something that went through a different kind of becoming. Empoleon controls territory through presence and positioning, rather than through active conflict whenever possible. This leadership orientation, using influence and status to manage a space rather than fighting continuously for it, is consistent with the pride that began in Piplup. The creature that refused patronizing care has become the creature that others recognize without needing to be told who holds authority here. The water and steel combination that defines Empoleon creates a typing profile that is remarkably resistant across many categories of threat. The steel neutralizes the electric weakness that pure water types carry. This is not simply a mechanical benefit in battle terms. It communicates something about what Empoleon has become, The vulnerability that Piplup's pride could not fully address has been resolved not by softening, but by hardening. The fifth generation of starter Pokemon came with Unova, a region that carried the energy of a new world, modeled on environments quite different from the regions that preceded it. The starters of Unova, Snivy, Tepig, and Oshawott, each brought distinct qualities that reflected both the regional character and an evolution in how the starter tradition was being thought about. Snivy is the grass-type starter of Unova, and it presents something that the grass-type category had not quite produced before. Its composure is absolute. Where Treecko's cool had a competitive edge beneath it, Snivy's cool is genuinely serene. It is not building toward an outburst. It is not calculating the moment to engage. It is simply, fundamentally, at ease with what it is. This ease is reflected in the physical efficiency of Snivy's design. The legs become less prominent as the evolutionary line progresses, eventually disappearing in Superior, the final form. But even in Snivy's earliest stage, the legs are used minimally. The tail does much of the postural work. The spine is straight. The head is held with a particular stillness that communicates that this creature has decided not to be hurried by anything. Snivy's relationship to sunlight is similar to Bulbasaur's in the sense that it draws energy from photosynthesis, but the experience of watching Snivy in sunlight is quite different. Bulbasaur soaks. Snivy simply receives. The attitude toward sunlight, like its attitude toward most things, is one of calm expectation. The sun is providing what it always provides, and Snivy accepts this as appropriate. The intelligence that Snivy is attributed with manifests in a very specific way. It is not a problem-solving intelligence in the active sense. It is an intelligence of assessment, of reading situations and understanding them without needing to engage deeply to know what they contain. Snivy glances at something and understands it. It does not need to examine further. This quick, comprehensive assessment capability means that Snivy is rarely surprised in a way that significantly affects its composure. It has already processed what is happening before most creatures have finished reacting to it. The serenity is partly a product of this cognitive speed. By the time most things require a response, Snivy has already decided what that response is. In battle, Snivy focuses on control techniques rather than raw damage output. It drains opponent energy, applies status conditions, and uses the environment to its advantage. These strategies require the same patient intelligence that defines Snivy's overall character. They are not dramatic. They work slowly and thoroughly. Servin, the middle stage, develops this control-based approach while adding a mobility that Snivy's minimal leg use somewhat restricted. Servin moves through grass and undergrowth with remarkable speed, low to the ground in a manner that makes it difficult to track. The control capabilities expand in this form, and the speed to apply them effectively arrives alongside. Superior is the final form of this evolutionary line, and it is one of the most visually distinctive final evolutions in the starter lineup. The legs are gone. The body has elongated dramatically. The overall impression is of something both ancient and immediately present, a creature that belongs to a deep lineage while inhabiting the current moment completely. The regal quality that Superior communicates is not performed. It does not attempt to appear noble. It simply has the bearing of something that has never been less than what it is. The crown-like structures at the ends of its tail and the patterns along its length contribute to this impression, but they are consistent with rather than creating the overall quality. Superior's most powerful abilities involve drawing on the energy in its environment and in its own photosynthetic processes to amplify its capabilities in specific ways. It can gather the power of all the sunlight that has ever touched it into a concentrated expression that far exceeds what its base capability would suggest. This is consistent with the evolutionary line's slow accumulation of stored potential. Nothing that Snivy absorbed is wasted. The contrast between Superior's elegant, unhurried demeanor and the tremendous power it can release when it chooses to do so is one of the more striking qualities of this final evolution. Nothing in its resting behavior suggests the depth of what it can produce. The lesson from this entire line is consistent across every stage. The surface of things does not fully describe what they contain. Tepig is the fire-type starter of Unova, and its design carries a combination of warmth and earnestness that distinguishes it clearly from the other fire-type starters. Where Charmander's fire is externally visible and tied to something vital, Cyndaquil's fire is internal and reserved, and Torchic's fire is concealed behind its soft appearance. Tepig's fire emerges from its nose and is connected directly to how the creature expresses itself emotionally. The nostrils of Tepig release smoke when it is not feeling well, and the same pathway is used for its fire attacks when it is healthy and engaged. The nose, in other words, serves as both a health indicator and a weapon, a two-directional communication system that tells observers something about what is happening inside the creature at any moment. This transparency of internal state is one of Tepig's most humanizing qualities. It does not disguise its feelings. If it is happy, that happiness is expressed through how it moves and what it produces. If it is unwell or unhappy, that too is visible. There is very little opacity in Tepig's relationship with its own condition. The roundness of Tepig's body and the curl of its tail contribute to an overall impression of something that has settled comfortably into itself. It is content. This contentment is not the same as complacency. Tepig engages with energy and enthusiasm when given the opportunity, but it does not spend its resting moments in agitation. It rests fully when it rests. Tepig's evolution into Pignite marks the arrival of the fighting type alongside the fire type, a combination that several Sinnoh and Unova starters share, suggesting that this generation was particularly interested in starters that developed physical martial capability alongside elemental power. The internal furnace that becomes more prominent in Pignite's description allows it to generate power for its physical movements by burning food reserves directly. This makes Pignite capable of sustained physical output that fire alone would not support. The fire feeds the fighting in a functional metabolic sense that makes the type combination feel coherent rather than arbitrary. Emboar, the final form, is large and powerful and carries its fire in a blaze around its neck, a collar of flame that communicates both the intensity of its fire and the physical strength that the fighting type expresses in this creature. Emboar fights with the directness and force that Tepig's earnestness always suggested, scaled up into something that makes those qualities genuinely formidable. The loyalty that the Tepig evolutionary line is attributed with is consistent throughout. This is not a line that forms bonds lightly or maintains them shallowly. The warmth that Tepig brings to its early relationship with a trainer deepens into something quite serious by the time Emboar is the creature maintaining it. The quality of that bond is proportional to the physical scale of the creature. Oshawott is the water-type starter of Unova, and it arrives carrying the Scalcop, a small shell-based object worn on its chest. This Scalcop is detached and used as a weapon in battle, functioning as both a blunt instrument and, when the edges are sharpened with water, as something capable of fine, precise cutting. The relationship between Oshawott and its Scalcop is one of the more personally intimate object Pokemon relationships in the starter lineup. The Scalcop is not armor or decoration. It is a tool that Oshawott has learned to use, and its skill with this tool is something that develops through practice and through the deepening of its own capabilities. Losing the Scalcop is experienced by Oshawott as genuinely distressing, not simply as a tactical disadvantage, but as a loss of something important. This personal relationships with a specific tool is interesting in the context of a creature that is otherwise somewhat at the mercy of its own awkward nature. Oshawott is not particularly graceful on land. It is better suited to water, and on land it sometimes falls and sometimes struggles with balance in ways that do not suggest a creature perfectly adapted to the surface it is moving across. But with the Scalchop, it has something mastered. The gap between Oshawott's sometimes clumsy terrestrial movement and its skill with its specific tool creates a character that is both endearing and genuinely capable. It does not need to be graceful across all dimensions. It needs to be effective in the one dimension that matters most. Dewott, the middle stage of this evolutionary line, demonstrates what happens when Oshawott's single Scalcop capability is expanded through training and development. Dewott wears 2 Scalcops and has developed a 2-weapon fighting style that turns the tool mastery of its earlier form into something more complex and more impressive in battle. The discipline that Dewott develops around this fighting style is notable. It trains continuously, refining its movements with the Scalcops into patterns that combine defense and offense in ways that single-weapon fighting does not fully enable. The 2 Scalcop style requires more coordination, more spatial awareness, and a higher level of internalized skill. This commitment to developing craft, the idea that mastery requires continuous, deliberate practice, is an unusual quality to find expressed in the middle stage of an evolutionary line. Most middle stages are simply developing greater physical capability. Dewott is developing refined skill, which is a different kind of development. Samurott, the final form, expresses this accumulated skill in a form that has undergone a more dramatic physical transformation than any of its earlier stages suggested. The creature that was a small, slightly awkward otter has become a large, 4-legged creature with a formidable and elaborate approach to its own capability. The Scalcops are now Shameweeder, integrated into the creature's leg armor, and the entire approach to combat has expanded to match. The 6th generation brought starter Pokémon to the Kalos region, a place of beauty, history, and a particular attention to elegance and design. The starters chosen for Kalos, Chespin, Fennekin, and Froakie each carried qualities that suited this aesthetic context, while remaining true to their elemental identities. Chespin is the grass-type starter of Kalos, and it brings something to the starter lineup that several earlier grass types had not quite expressed so directly: a rugged, cheerful toughness. Chespin is not serene like Snivy. It is not quietly patient like Bulbasaur. It is active, curious, sometimes impulsive, and not at all bothered by this about itself. The quills that cover Chespin's head are its most visually prominent feature, and they can harden to a degree that makes them useful in battle. This hardening capability is something Chespin can control, activating it in response to perceived threat or in the midst of physical contact. The quills do not simply exist as decoration, they are responsive. This responsiveness extends to Chespin's general disposition. It reacts to its environment with genuine curiosity and immediate engagement. New things are examined directly. Challenges are met with enthusiasm rather than hesitation. This approach to the world creates a certain amount of accidental trouble, as curiosity untempered by caution tends to do, but it also means that Chespin develops rapidly through direct experience. Quilladin, the middle stage, channels Chespin's energy through a significantly more durable body. The outer layer that covers Quilladin's body now serves as genuine armor, providing a physical resilience that Chespin's quills only approximated. The energetic engagement with the world that characterized Chespin is now occurring from behind protection that changes what risks are worth taking. The armor of Quilladin is strong enough to deflect attacks that would seriously damage an unprotected creature. This shifts how Quilladin can engage in battle, allowing a more direct style that Chespin's relative vulnerability did not support. The quills remain sharp, but they are now part of a system of defense and offense that works together. Chesnaught, the final form, is one of the most imposing grass-type final evolutions in the starter lineup. Its physical scale and the thickness of its shell-like armor give it a presence that immediately communicates resilience. This final form can use its body as a barrier for others, placing itself between threats and those it is protecting in ways that its physical durability makes viable. The protective quality that Chesnaught expresses in this way connects back to something that began in Chespin's direct engagement with the world. The cheerful curiosity that characterized the earliest stage has become a willingness to stand in the way of harm for others. The same quality that drove Chespin forward into new experiences now drives Chesnaught forward between danger and what needs protecting. Fennekin is the fire-type starter of Kalos, and his design emphasizes something that other fire starters had not centered so explicitly. Where Charmander and Cyndaquil and Torchic and Tepig were all built around their relationship to fire as a direct physical force, Fennekin's fire connects to something more mental, more about intelligence and focused will than about raw thermal power. The tufts of fur in Fennekin's large ears are functional, releasing heat that the creature stores internally. This ear-based thermal release is not a battle attack. It is a comfort behavior, a way of managing its own internal temperature that also happens to make Fennekin feel pleasantly warm to be near. The fire is connected to comfort and well-being rather than to threat. The snacking behavior that Fennekin is noted for, specifically its enjoyment of twigs, is connected to the fire it generates. Chewing twigs and processing them through its system provides some of the organic material that fuels its flame. This connection between eating and fire making is unusual and specific to this creature. The intelligence and pride that Fennekin is attributed with create a creature that is selective about its relationships in ways that resemble Piplup's selectivity. Fennekin does not extend trust readily. It observes, it assesses, it chooses, and the choices it makes are maintained with considerable consistency. Braixen, the middle stage, develops the psychic energy that begins to manifest in this evolutionary line alongside the fire capabilities that were already present. The stick that Braixen keeps in the fur of its tail, and which it draws out for battle, channels both fire and the emerging psychic force in ways that make the creature's attacks feel more focused and more deliberate than Fennekin's more diffuse warmth. The combination of fire and psychic that Braixen is moving toward is unusual in the starter lineup and creates something that feels genuinely different from what fire-type starters have historically expressed. The fire is not just thermal force. It is fire that has been touched by something more precise, more interior, more connected to the specific focus of a thinking creature. Delphox, the final form, fully expresses this fire-psychic combination through a design that includes a wand-like branch wielded with deliberate ceremonial quality. Delphox is described in some sources as gazing into its own flames to perceive things that are happening at a distance, and this predictive or perceptive capability fits with the overall development of the line from warmth to intelligence to something that sees clearly. The robe-like fur that surrounds Delphox's body adds to the impression of a creature that has moved beyond simple elemental expression into something more complex. This is a fire type that thinks about fire, that uses it as a medium of perception as well as a tool of action. That reflective relationship with its own elemental nature makes Delphox one of the more unusual final evolutions in the starter lineup. Froakie is the water-type starter of Kalos, and it carries its bubbles on its back, a white, frothy collection of foam-covered bubbles that Froakie produces and uses in battle. These bubbles are not simply decorative. They reduce air resistance, cushion impacts, and can be thrown at opponents. They are functional objects that Froakie generates and manages as part of its regular activity. The serious quality that Froakie is attributed with sits somewhat oddly with the playful visual impression its bubble-covered body creates. But this gap between appearance and character is genuine. Froakie is attentive, alert, and capable in ways that its somewhat comic bubble beard does not immediately communicate. Trainers who underestimate it based on its appearance tend to find this quickly corrected. The speed that Froakie is developing toward, the extreme agility that Greninja will eventually represent, is already visible in how Froakie moves in its earliest stage. It is quick and responsive, not obviously, but consistently. Situations change around Froakie, and it adjusts without perceptible lag. This speed of response is not dramatic in the way that Chimchar's agility is dramatic. It is just consistently faster than expected. The water that Froakie uses is intimately connected to these bubbles. The same biological process that produces the frubbles produces the water-based attacks Froakie develops. The foam is a natural product of how this creature processes the water it takes in, and both the foam and the attacks emerge from the same source. Frogadier, the middle stage, narrows the gap between Froakie's observed speed and the extreme performance that Greninja will represent. The bubbles become more precisely controlled, directed with greater intention, and used in battle in more sophisticated combinations. Frogadier's movement has become genuinely impressive, sharp and clean in ways that its earlier stage only hinted at. The single-mindedness that develops in Frogadier, the increasing focus on becoming maximally fast and maximally capable, creates a creature in this middle stage that is primarily interested in the development of its own capabilities. It is not social in the way that earlier Pokémon in this lineup have been. It is committed to a specific process of becoming. Greninja is one of the most discussed final evolutions in the starter lineup of any generation, and the qualities it expresses are the culmination of everything that began in Froakie's serious, attentive, bubble-wrapped form. The speed is extraordinary. The precision of its water-based attacks, which can cut through dense materials, expresses everything that Froakie's serious nature was always developing toward. The water shuriken that Greninja creates and throws with its tongue are precisely shaped and delivered with accuracy that requires both the extreme speed and the focused intelligence that this evolutionary line developed across every stage. Nothing here is accidental. The creature that began as a small frog with foam bubbles became something that moves faster than most creatures perceive and strikes more accurately than most creatures can avoid. The 7th generation brought starter Pokémon to the Alola region, a place of warmth, island life, and a culture built around deep relationships between people and Pokémon. The starters of Alola, Rowlet, Litten, and Poplio each carried something of that cultural context alongside their elemental identities. Rowlet is the grass and flying type starter of Alola, the first grass type starter in the main series to carry a second type from its earliest stage. The dual typing is visible immediately in Rowlet's design. It is a bird, unmistakably, with the round body of an owl and feathers arranged into what reads as a small bow tie of leaves across its chest. Grass and birds have been synthesized rather than placed side by side. This synthesis creates a creature that moves between the ground-level plant world and the aerial world of flying creatures with equal comfort. Rowlet can fight from a distance, using razor-edged leaf projectiles, or it can engage in close physical combat at speed, flipping and kicking with its feet. These two modes of engagement exist comfortably within the same body, because the body was designed for both. The silence that Rowlet maintains in flight, a quality of owls generally, means that it can approach situations without announcing itself. This is a different kind of stealth than Grovile's canopy movement or Froakies' speed. It is the stealth of something that can simply be quiet, that moves without the sound that movement usually makes. Rowlet's large eyes see in low light as well as any owl would, and its ability to navigate by sound as much as sight makes it effective in conditions that would limit creatures relying primarily on vision. The nighttime quality that these sensory capabilities suggest connects to something that the owlet environmental context supports. Alola is a region of many microclimates and many temporal variations. A starter that can function across all of them is well suited to the region. Dartrix, the middle stage, develops something in addition to the physical capabilities that Rowlet already possessed. The perfectionist quality that Dartrix is attributed with creates a creature intensely focused on the precision of what it does. The leaf projectiles it creates and throws are not simply released. They are calibrated. Dartrix will remake a feather blade repeatedly until it meets an internal standard. This perfectionism creates a middle stage that is in some ways more demanding than either the beginning or the end of this evolutionary line. Dartrix is difficult in the specific way that any creature with very high internal standards tends to be difficult. It is dissatisfied easily, self-critical, and this self-critical quality can shade into a kind of frustration if its standards are not being met. Decidueye, the final form, resolves Dartrix's perfectionism into something more settled. The ghost typing that arrives with this evolution is unusual for a starter final form, and it adds a quality to Decidueye's capabilities that is quite different from anything in the earlier stages. The arrows that Decidueye fires are not simple physical projectiles. They have the ability to pass through barriers and strike at something beneath the surface of what they appear to touch. Litten is the fire-type starter of Alola, and it carries its fire in a way entirely its own. The fur that Litten maintains so carefully is laced with oils that are highly flammable, and when Litten grooms itself, it ingests these oils. The fire that Litten produces is made from igniting the oily hairball that builds up inside from this grooming. This is simultaneously one of the most unusual and most specific fire mechanisms in the starter lineup. The practical result is that Litten must groom to fight effectively, and that grooming is functional rather than merely aesthetic. A well-groomed Litten has fuel. A neglected Litten does not. This dependency on self-care as a precondition for capability is unlike anything else in the starter lineup. The cool, detached quality that Litten is attributed with does not mean that it is emotionally unavailable. It means that it processes its emotions quietly and privately, rather than expressing them outwardly. Its internal life is rich. Its external presentation is restrained. Trainers who understand this distinction describe Litten as one of the most rewarding starter bonds, precisely because the affection that does eventually emerge is clearly genuine rather than performed. The gradual development of trust with Litten follows a longer timeline than many other starters. It does not give easily or quickly, but what it gives when the trust is established is consistent and serious in a way that reflects the depth of what it was protecting all along. Torracat, the middle stage, develops the fire capability of this line through a fire sac in its throat that allows more controlled and varied use of flame than Litten's hairball-based system. The bell that develops in this stage, ringing when the fire sac warms up, provides both an auditory signal of the creature's readiness and a practical communication tool in certain contexts. Incineroar, the final form, undergoes the most dramatic shift in character across any of the starter evolutionary lines in terms of how personality is expressed. The cool, private Litten becomes something publicly intense, performative in its aggression, and oriented toward the reaction of others in ways that Litten was not. The crowd-pleasing quality that Incineroar develops creates a creature that has found a way to express what it previously kept inside through the drama of battle performance. This transformation from internal to external expression across the evolutionary line is one of the more nuanced character arcs in the starter lineup. Litten held its nature quiet. Torracat let some of it through. Incineroar puts it on display. The same creature, across 3 stages, moved from concealment to performance. That journey is its own kind of story. The fire that wraps around Incineroar's waist, visible as a belt of flame, is the full expression of the fire that Litten generated from ingested oils. The mechanism has changed entirely, but the fire is still there, still defined by something intimate and biological rather than simply elemental. Poplio is the water-type starter of Alola, and it carries an art form with it from the beginning. The balloons that Poplio creates from water and blows from its nose are precisely that, controlled objects requiring practice and skill to create well. Poplio in its earliest stage does not create perfect balloons. It works at them, it practices. This visible practice, the willingness to try and try again at something that is not yet mastered, gives Poplio a quality that other starters do not quite share. Most starter Pokémon arrive at their capabilities through growth and evolution. Poplio's signature capability is something it develops through repetition and effort within its current stage. The practice is visible. The improvement is visible. The performance orientation that Poplio's balloon creating and circus style movement connects to fits with Alola's cultural relationship with Pokémon performance, specifically the various shows and festivals that are part of the regional identity. Poplio exists naturally in a context that values what it does. But beneath the performance quality, Poplio is noted for perseverance that is uncommon. It does not stop practicing when the results are imperfect. It does not stop when training is difficult. The cheerful exterior that might suggest a creature taking things lightly conceals a determination that only becomes fully visible in how it responds to failure. Brionne, the middle stage, develops the performance quality of Poplio into something more controlled and more expressive. The dances that Brionne performs while moving in battle are not simply aesthetic, they are combat techniques that use movement and misdirection in ways that make the creature difficult to predict and difficult to target accurately. The emotional quality that Brionne conceals while performing creates one of the more poignant middle stages in the starter lineup. It maintains its cheerful performance regardless of its internal state, presenting a smooth surface even when what it is feeling is less smooth. Those who know Brionne well can sometimes read the difference between a truly happy performance and one that is covering something more difficult. Primarina, the final form, carries all of this accumulated practice in performance and emotional depth into a creature that uses its voice in battle. The songs that Primarina performs are not simply sound. They shape the water around it, create spheres that can be detonated as attacks or sustained as barriers, and communicate with other Pokémon in ways that words cannot. The fairy typing that Primarina carries alongside water is expressed through this magical quality of sound, the idea that music can do things that physical force cannot. The balloons that Poplio practiced making have become something bound together with voice and will into objects of genuine power. The practice was always building toward this. The 8th generation brought starter Pokémon to Galar, a region of industrial history, wild landscapes, and a particular energy that came through in the creatures chosen to begin a trainer's journey there. Grookey as Scorbunny and Sobble each expressed something of the regional character while remaining distinct individuals. Grookey is the grass-type starter of Galar, and its relationship to its stick is central to understanding what this creature is. The stick that Grookey carries was taken from the tree in the forest where it originated, and as long as it is carried and tended, it remains alive. This living stick is not a weapon. It is a connection to origin, carried forward. The drumming that Grookey does with its stick is not purely behavioral. When it drums on natural surfaces, grass begins to grow and wilted plants begin to recover. The rhythm produces an effect in the environment around it. Music and growth are connected in this creature in a way that is different from Primarina's sound-based magic, because Grookey's drumming is unpolished, instinctive, and physical. The energetic, somewhat rowdy quality that Grookey is noted for expresses something genuinely joyful rather than simply hyperactive. It is a creature that is pleased to exist, and that pleasure is audible and visible almost continuously. This enthusiasm is its own kind of gift to the trainer who receives it. Thwackey develops Grookey's musical capability into something more complex, carrying two sticks and drumming with more sophisticated rhythms that produce more pronounced effects on the environment. The music has developed from a single beat into something with structure, with pattern, with the beginnings of intention. Rillaboom, the final form, carries with it a massive drum that it has grown and that it plays with both hands and feet simultaneously, producing rhythms powerful enough to be felt physically, in addition to being heard. The grass-based effects that began with Grookey's simple stick have become something considerably more dramatic in scale. The qualities that began as Grookey's joyful energy have become in Rillaboom a kind of commanding presence, a creature whose physical scale and rhythmic power draw attention without effort. But the joy is still there, quieter now, more settled, expressed in how it plays rather than in constant outward enthusiasm. The evolution from Grookey's playful beginning to Rillaboom's commanding final form mirrors the way musical training works in a general sense. What begins as instinctive, joyful, somewhat chaotic engagement becomes, through development and refinement, something with both power and precision. The instrument grows with the musician. A Scorbunny is the fire-type starter of Galar, and it brings an energy to the fire-type category that is specifically athletic. The sport quality that connects to the regional cultural context of Galar, which drew inspiration from football culture, is visible in how Scorbunny moves. It is oriented toward running, jumping, and striking with its feet. The small soot marks on Scorbunny's nose are connected to the fire energy stored in its feet, specifically in the pads that generate heat when it moves quickly enough. This foot-based fire is functional, heating the ground beneath its running feet and powering the kicks that become its primary battle tool. The sincerity that Scorbunny is noted for is uncomplicated. It wants to try hard. It wants to get better. It wants the people around it to be pleased by what it does. These are straightforward motivations, expressed consistently, and they create a starter that is easy to build a bond with because its intentions are always legible. The evolution of this line through Raboot and into Cinderace demonstrates how that sincere energy becomes channeled through developing skill. Raboot develops a controlled quality that tempers Scorbunny's sometimes unbridled enthusiasm. Cinderace is fully focused, an athlete in complete command of the capabilities it has spent its entire development building. Cinderace's ability to create a massive fire-infused ball from pebbles and charge it with its own fire, kicked with the force of its fully developed athletic capability, is the completion of everything that Scorbunny was practicing when it struck things with its feet in its earliest stage. The fire in the feet was always building toward this. The fire that Cinderace's balls carry is personalized in a sense, connected to the individual creature's specific fire energy in a way that makes each blazing shot distinctly its own. This personal quality in how fire-type abilities are expressed is something that appears across multiple fire starters, but is particularly clear in Cinderace because the mechanism is so visible. The crowd-pleasing instinct that Cinderace shares with Incineroar is present here too, though expressed very differently. Where Incineroar performs drama, Cinderace performs skill. The appreciation it seeks is for the quality of what it does rather than for the impact it creates. These are different relationships with the attention of others, and they produce different kinds of battle presence. What Scorbunny's evolutionary line ultimately expresses is the idea that sincere effort, consistently applied toward a specific capability, produces excellence. This is a very clean and direct story, and the starter lineup benefits from having it told straightforwardly alongside the more complex narratives of other starters. Sobble is the water-type starter of Galar, and it arrives as one of the most emotionally vulnerable starters in the entire franchise. Its capacity for crying is extreme. It cries easily. It cries from fear and sadness, and sometimes simply from startlement, and its tears carry a chemical compound that induces involuntary crying in anyone exposed to them. This means that Sobble's crying spreads. This quality creates a strange kind of defensive capability embedded in what appears to be pure vulnerability. Sobble is not strong. Sobble is not confident. Sobble is genuinely frightened by many things. But its fear produces a response in the environment that changes the emotional state of whatever is near it in ways that can be disruptive. The invisibility that Sobble achieves by pressing against water and blending with its surface is its primary survival tool. It does not fight its vulnerability by becoming stronger. It avoids the need to face it through concealment. This is a different strategy than any previous water-type starter, but it is a completely coherent one. The empathy that Sobble is sometimes described as having, a genuine responsiveness to the distress of others that goes beyond simply feeling its own distress, suggests that the crying is not simply biological weakness, but something connected to an emotional sensitivity that is real and deep. Drizzle, the middle stage, manages Sobble's vulnerability differently. The anxiety is still present, but it has been partially concealed behind a more guarded, disengaged exterior. Drizzle has developed a kind of protective coolness, a way of holding its emotional sensitivity at a remove from its visible surface. The vulnerability did not disappear, it went inside. Inteleon, the final form, is one of the most dramatic transformations in the starter lineup. The small, frightened water lizard that cried at nearly everything became a sleek, precise creature that presents complete surface control and operates through concealment, patience, and exact application of its water-based capabilities. The spy quality that Inteleon embodies is specifically connected to its extreme emotional control. Whatever it feels, it does not show. Whatever it knows, it reveals strategically. The precision of its water attacks, capable of targeting specific weak points from very long distances, expresses an attention to detail that goes well beyond what simple crying vulnerability would suggest. What Sobble's evolutionary line demonstrates is that vulnerability is not a final state. The quality that made Sobble seem weak was precisely the emotional sensitivity that became, through development, the attentiveness and precision that defines Inteleon. The feeling did not go away. It became useful. The 9th generation brought starter Pokémon to Paldea, a region of wide-open landscapes, university culture, and an energy that emphasized exploration and personal discovery. The starters of Paldea, Sprigatito, Fuecoco, and Quaxley each carried something of that regional spirit. Sprigatito is the grass-type starter of Paldea, and it carries a quality that several other starters have touched but none quite owned as completely. It is a performer, specifically in the sense of a cat that knows it is being watched and has feelings about this. The attention that Sprigatito receives from trainers and from others is something it is aware of, responds to, and occasionally demands. The sweet scent produced by the moisture in Sprigatito's fur is a natural quality, but it has the effect of making people relax, and become slightly inattentive to their surroundings when Sprigatito is near. This is not a deliberate attack. It is simply what the creature produces. The effect can be disarming. The jealousy that Sprigatito is noted for when its trainer gives attention to other Pokémon is part of the same attentiveness to being noticed. This creature wants to be seen and valued by those it chooses to be with. That desire creates the conditions for deep attachment when the relationship is properly reciprocal. Meowscarada, the final form of this evolutionary line, extends the performance quality into a magician-style expression of its capabilities, using misdirection and illusion alongside genuine speed and power in ways that make it one of the more theatrically interesting final evolutions in the Paldea lineup. Fuecoco is the fire-type starter of Paldea, and it is perhaps the most relaxed fire-type starter in the franchise's history. Its relationship to its own fire is comfortable rather than intense. The fire cells distributed across its scales absorb heat and convert it to fire energy at a pace that Fuecoco seems perfectly at peace with. There is no urgency in how this creature interacts with its own elemental nature. The ghost typing that arrives with Skeledirge, the final form, creates a fire and ghost combination that is unusual in the starter lineup. The fire connects to life and warmth, and the ghost typing connects to something in between life and its absence, creating a tension that the final form's design resolves by emphasizing the warmth as something that persists. The singing that Skeledirge uses, specifically a form of singing that incorporates fire in its sound production, turns music into a specific battle capability in a way that connects this final form to Primarina's voice-based abilities from a completely different elemental and tonal direction. Fuecoco's easygoing nature, present throughout all three stages of this evolutionary line, means that this is a starter that grows without urgency, develops without drama, and arrives at considerable power without having needed to be intense at any point along the way. There is a particular kind of wisdom in that path. Quaxly is the water-type starter of Paldea, and its pride in its appearance, particularly in the coiffure of hair on its head, which it maintains carefully and dislikes having disturbed, creates a very specific character profile from the beginning. This is a creature with aesthetic standards that it applies to itself. The pompadour that requires special oil to maintain represents a commitment to presentation that is both trivial and serious simultaneously. It is trivial because it is hair. It is serious because it reflects a genuine internal standard that Quaxly applies consistently. The hair must be right. This extends into how Quaxly carries itself more broadly. Things should be as they should be. The marching quality to Quaxly's movement, a distinctive rhythmic step that several sources describe as one of its identifying characteristics, creates a creature that has a sense of its own proper movement in the world. It moves in a certain way because that is the correct way to move. This propriety extends to battle, where Quaxly's style is methodical and structured. Quaquaval, the final form, expresses all of this structured propriety through an elaborate, powerful performance dance style that is the complete expression of what began as Quaxly's careful step. The dancer is what the precise marcher was always becoming. The care taken with one's own appearance and one's own movement became, through development, something genuinely beautiful and genuinely powerful. What is easy to overlook when moving through the generations is how the design of starter Pokémon also reflects something about the world each region was trying to build. The starters were never simply standalone creatures selected for variety. Each trio was chosen to feel native, to belong to the specific character of the region they came from in ways that would become more apparent as the journey progressed. Kanto's starters carry an urbanism beneath their natural qualities. Bulbasaur's dual-type combination is complex in a way that requires consideration. Charmander's dependency on external conditions makes it demanding in ways that reward attention. Squirtle's defensive architecture suggests a creature that evolved in environments where threat was a constant variable to be managed. These are not simply animals. They are creatures shaped by a region where humans and Pokémon have lived in close proximity for a very long time. The relationship between Kanto's starters and Kanto's landscape becomes apparent when the journey is underway. Bulbasaur's comfort in forested areas makes the early routes feel like home territory for it. Charmander's discomfort in rain becomes relevant in certain areas of the region where weather changes frequently. Squirtle's ease near water reflects the coastal and riverine geography that cuts through much of Kanto's eastern side. This ecological specificity is part of what made the original trio feel genuine rather than arbitrary. They did not simply fill 3-type slots. They inhabited a specific world, and their qualities reflected that world back in ways that rewarded players who paid attention. Johto's starters extended this approach while bringing something distinctly their own to the concept. The region itself was designed to feel older than Kanto, more rooted in a time before the dense urbanization of its neighboring region had fully transformed the landscape. The starters of Johto carry this older quality in ways that are not always immediately visible. Chikorita's affectionate nature and the therapeutic qualities of its fragrance suggest a creature that evolved in close relationship with a human culture that valued healing and care. The Johto region's traditions emphasize balance between people and nature, and Chikorita embodies that balance in its very biology. It does not simply grow, it nurtures. Cyndaquil's interior fire and its timid nature suggest a creature that developed its capabilities in an environment where open display was not advantageous. Something in Cyndaquil's evolutionary history favored concealment over announcement, restraint over expression. The landscapes of Johto include dense forests and cave systems where quick, quiet movement would have served better than blazing heat. Totodile's social energy and its enthusiasm for physical engagement fits with a region whose culture includes festivals, performances, and communal celebrations. A creature that thrives on interaction, that meets the world with the full weight of its physical self, belongs naturally to a culture that values active participation. Totodile does not watch from a distance, it joins. The bond between a starter Pokémon and its trainer develops through stages that are not always visible in the mechanics of the games themselves. The mechanical representation, the friendship value that rises through battles and care, captures something real, but not everything. What the numbers do not capture is the accumulated quality of shared experience. A starter that has been through a difficult gym battle alongside its trainer has something that the friendship counter reflects only approximately. The specific memory of that battle, the specific sequence of moves and recoveries, and close margins, belongs to the relationship in a way that cannot be reduced to a value. The trainer remembers it. The Pokémon responds to the trainer who was there. This accumulated texture of shared experience is what makes the starter bond different from the bond formed with a Pokémon caught in the wild. The caught Pokémon enters a relationship that is already underway. The starter begins it. There is no version of the journey that precedes the starter's involvement. The starter was there from the first step. This is a different kind of bond than the one formed with a favorite team member encountered partway through a journey, even if that bond becomes equally deep. The starter carries the memory of being chosen, of being the first, in a way that nothing can replicate and nothing can replace. The specific mechanics of how each starter engages with its trainer in the early parts of a journey shape the character of the bond more than any later development. The early hours of a Pokémon game, when the starter is the only companion and every route is new, form the foundation of everything that follows. Trainers who chose Bulbasaur Remember learning patience in those early hours, understanding that the strategy of waiting for the right moment was rewarded. Trainers who chose Charmander remember the anxiety of the first gym, the awareness that the fire type would struggle, and the choice of whether to push through it or prepare more carefully. Trainers who chose Squirtle remember the particular ease of those first encounters, the security of having something defensive and reliable at their side. These early experiences are disproportionately formative, not just in terms of gameplay skill, but in terms of the emotional relationship with the Pokemon itself. What happens in the first hour carries more weight than what happens in the 40th hour, because the first hour establishes expectations and creates the template through which all later experiences are interpreted. The starter Pokemon that seems ordinary in the late game, outpaced by legendary encounters and powerful late route additions, is the same creature that provided the entire emotional foundation for why those later encounters matter at all. There is a particular quality to the experience of going back to a starter in the late hours of a Pokemon game, when the team is full and the journey is nearly complete, and finding that the starter is still there, still the same creature and essential character as the one that was chosen at the very beginning. The starter has grown, it has evolved, its statistics have developed, and its moveset has expanded in ways that make it a very different tool in battle than it was on the first route. But the character has not changed. The quality that was present in the beginning is still present now, simply expressed through a larger, more capable form. This continuity of character across physical transformation is one of the quiet miracles of Pokemon's evolutionary system. The creature does not become someone different when it evolves. It becomes more fully itself. Charmander's warmth did not disappear when it became Charmeleon or Charizard. It intensified and found different expression. Squirtle's careful observation did not fade when it became Wartortle or Blastoise. It deepened into something more experienced and more assured. The player who chose a starter at the beginning and carries it through to the end of the journey has watched this process happen in a creature they chose. That is something different from watching it happen in a creature they acquired. The choice created a relationship with the entirety of that process. The mega evolution forms that some starter final evolutions can achieve represent a particular kind of statement about the depth of the bond between trainer and Pokemon. Venusaur, Charizard, and Blastoise all have mega evolution forms, as do Blaziken, Sceptile, Swampert, and others across various generations. The mechanics of mega evolution require a bond of sufficient depth that the Pokemon temporarily exceeds its normal limits. What this means in the context of starter Pokemon specifically is that the creatures chosen at the beginning of the journey are among those most capable of this temporary transcendence. The depth of bond required is achievable precisely because the starter bond begins earlier and accumulates across the entire length of the journey rather than a portion of it. Mega Venusaur expresses everything that Bulbasaur was always carrying, but could not fully manifest at its normal form. The flower does not simply grow larger. It becomes something almost architectural, dense with capability, radiating the accumulated biological investment of an entire evolutionary history. The calming scent that Venusaur produces becomes, in mega form, something significantly more potent. Mega Charizard presents two different directions, two different expressions of what Charizard's deep bond can become, reflecting the fact that the fire within this creature has always been capable of going in more than one direction. The choice between which mega form to activate is itself an expression of the depth of the trainer's knowledge of their specific Charizard. What the mega evolution mechanic made visible was something that the bond between starter and trainer had always contained but rarely had a way to express mechanically. That there is a depth to this relationship that normal statistics and movesets do not fully capture. That the creature can become, in the right conditions with the right partner, something beyond its expected form. This idea that the full capability of a starter Pokemon is not visible in its base statistics, that what is actually present in the relationship is greater than what the numbers show, reflects something true about the experience of playing these games. The starter does not feel like a tool with measurable output. It feels like a partner whose actual value is not entirely reducible to what can be measured. The emotional impact of a mega evolution is partly mechanical and partly something that the mechanics evoke, but do not fully contain. The visual transformation, the altered appearance, the changed statistics, all of these are real. But the sense that this is the same creature that was chosen at the beginning, now expressing something it could not express before, because the relationship that enables it took the entire journey to develop, that quality belongs to the player's experience rather than the game's systems. It is worth sitting with this for a moment. The number at the bottom of the friendship counter does not tell the whole story. The whole story takes the entirety of a journey to accumulate. The relationship between starter Pokemon and their regions extends beyond simple ecological matching into something that touches on the mythology and history each region contains. The starters are not simply creatures that happen to live in their regions. They are, in some sense, ambassadors of what those regions believe about the natural world. Hoenn's starters are connected to a region built on the dynamic relationship between land and sea, between the forces that create and destroy. Treecko's agile relationship with the forest canopy fits a region whose forests are dense and layered. Torchic's internally generated fire fits a region that contains active volcanic geology. Mudkip's sensitivity to water pressure and its amphibious comfort fits a region whose water routes are among the most extensive in the franchise. But each of these connections runs deeper than simple habitat matching. Treecko's composure in the face of whatever the forest presents to it reflects something about how Hoenn's culture relates to the natural world, not with fear, not with control, but with a kind of earned confidence that comes from genuinely inhabiting a space. Torchic's warmth, beneath a deceptively soft exterior, reflects something about the geological truth of Hoenn itself, which appears tropical and pleasant on the surface, while containing significant potential for dramatic change below. Mudkip's sensory attunement, its ability to know what the water is doing before it can see it, reflects the deep relationship that Hoenn maintains with its water roots as passages and as habitats, as things to be understood rather than simply used. Sinnoh's relationship with its starters runs through the ancient mythology that defines the region's identity. A region that tells the story of how the world itself was made, of creation and structure and the forces that organized existence into its current form, selects starters that reflect those themes in miniature. Turtwig carrying the soil of its own making, eventually becoming the creature whose back supports a living ecosystem, echoes the cosmological myths of Sinnoh, in which the world was shaped by entities whose movement and rest created the geography of reality. The idea that a living creature can be a world unto itself has deep roots in Sinnoh's way of understanding things. Chimchar's biological fire, generated by the processes of life itself rather than from an external spark, connects to the region's understanding of life as something internally generated and maintained. The fire that Sinnoh's myths describe as part of the region's creation was not brought from elsewhere. It was produced by what was already present. Chimchar embodies this principle at a personal scale. Piplup's pride in the cold northern waters connects to a region that respects the difficult and the demanding, that finds something admirable in creatures and in people who function effectively where the conditions are hardest. Sinnoh's northern geography is unforgiving, and the culture that developed there developed a corresponding respect for endurance without complaint. Unova approached the starter Pokemon concept with something slightly different in mind. The region itself was designed to feel modern, urban, and dynamic, and its starters reflect this orientation without abandoning the ecological grounding that earlier starters maintained. Snivy's composure in environments that are increasingly not quite wild, that include cities and bridges and structures built by human hands, suggests a creature that has made its peace with the changed world. Where earlier grass-type starters were forest and meadow creatures, Snivy exists comfortably in formal gardens and manicured parks as well. The serenity is not disrupted by human presence because Snivy does not find human presence inherently disruptive. Tepig's earnest quality fits a region that values authenticity and direct expression in a way that the more complicated cultural registers of earlier regions did not prioritize quite as explicitly. Tepig does not perform warmth. It simply is warm. In a region designed to feel transparent and contemporary, a starter that carries no hidden agenda and no concealed depth is its own kind of statement. Oshawott mastery of a specific tool and its development through practice fits a region that values skilled work and the kind of capability that comes from sustained application of effort. The cultural context that Unova drew on, with its emphasis on industry and craft and the skills that can be passed between generations, is present in the Oshawott line's deep commitment to what it does with its Scalcop. The relationship between starter Pokémon and the professors who give them is another layer of context that shapes what it means to receive a starter at the beginning of a journey. Each professor has a specific research focus, and the starters they provide are in some cases connected to that research. Professor Oak's focus on the relationship between Pokémon and humans connects directly to what the Kanto starters teach. Each of the 3 Kanto starters represents a different model of how that relationship can work. Bulbasaur requires the trainer to understand patience and long-term thinking. Charmander requires attentiveness and genuine care. Squirtle rewards methodical, careful preparation. The research Oak is conducting is visible in the 3 possibilities he offers. The act of the professor giving the starter directly to the trainer, rather than the trainer finding it in the wild or purchasing it, establishes a specific context for the relationship. This creature is entrusted to you by someone who knows what it is and what it is capable of becoming. The trainer receives not just a Pokémon, but a responsibility that was previously held by someone else and is now being handed forward. This transfer of responsibility is not trivial in the world of the games. The professor has typically raised these starter Pokémon from very early stages, or has ensured their care until the moment of the handover. The starter is not a stranger to human attention when it meets its trainer. It has already been in someone's care. What changes is whose. The moment of choosing a starter, the moment in each game when the 3 options are presented and the player must select one, carries a particular weight that no other moment in the games quite replicates. It is not simply a mechanical choice between type advantages. It is a commitment. The 2 starters not chosen do not simply cease to exist. They go to rival trainers. They continue their journeys alongside their own partners in the background of the world. The rival starter is often the one that has a type advantage over the player's choice, creating a recurring friction that is itself a kind of relationship between the 2 paths the world might have taken. The rival's starter exists as the version of the beginning that was not taken, the other possible first companions whose journeys run parallel to the chosen one. In some games, the rival relationship softens over time, and the rival becomes something more like a fellow traveler. In others, the rivalry maintains its edge throughout. But in all cases, the rival's starter is the reminder that the choice made at the beginning had a real alternative. Some players replay the games choosing different starters each time, experiencing the beginning from a different vantage point. These players describe the experience of the same game, feeling genuinely different depending on which starter they chose, not just mechanically, but in terms of the emotional texture of the early journey. The same routes feel different with a different companion. The same challenges feel different when approached from a different elemental starting point. The grass type starters as a group have developed an interesting reputation across the franchise's history. They are often described as the less popular choice, the starter selected by players who prioritize strategy over immediate gratification, who prefer the slower development of a power that will eventually prove comprehensive. This reputation is somewhat reductive, but it contains something real. Grass types face more type disadvantages than either fire or water in the standard matchup chart. They are weak to fire, ice, flying, bug, and poison type attacks, a notably long list compared to fire's 4 weaknesses and water's 2. This means that the grass starter faces more potential threats in any given encounter and requires more tactical consideration to protect effectively. What this creates is a different learning curve. Trainers who choose the grass starter learn to think more carefully about matchups earlier in the journey than those who choose fire or water. The grass starter does not carry through early areas on type advantage alone. It requires the trainer to understand what it can handle and what it cannot, to use its genuine strengths while protecting against its genuine vulnerabilities. This earlier demand for tactical thinking produces a different kind of trainer in the early hours of the game. Those who chose the grass starter often describe themselves as having been more careful in those early routes, more attentive to what was coming, more willing to retreat and prepare before engaging. The starter shaped the playstyle by requiring a playstyle from the very beginning. The fire-type starters have their own collective reputation, one built around power and enthusiasm, and the particular satisfaction of watching damage numbers rise. Fire is a type that communicates its capability immediately and directly. When a fire attack connects, the visual effect leaves no ambiguity about what happened. The fire was there, and it did what fire does. This directness creates a different early experience than the grass starter provides. The fire starter encourages forward engagement, the willingness to meet challenges head on, with the confidence that what you're bringing is enough. This is not recklessness. It is the kind of confidence that develops when early encounters reinforce the lesson that your chosen type handles the challenges being presented. But the fire starter in Kanto also teaches an early lesson about limitations in a way that the water starter does not. The first gym, if a player progresses through in the standard order, features rock-type Pokémon that fire attacks cannot exploit. The fire starter trainer learns early that being a fire type does not mean being powerful in all contexts. There are specific places where the fire needs to be supplemented. This early lesson about the specificity of strength, the idea that power in one context does not translate automatically to power in all contexts, is one of the more useful things a first journey can teach. The fire starter, by creating this lesson early, produces trainers who understand the map of what their team can and cannot do. The water-type starters are often described as the safest choice, and there is truth in that description. Water types face only 2 weaknesses in the standard type chart, to electric and grass attacks, and their strengths against fire, ground, and rock types cover a significant portion of the early challenges any Pokemon game presents. Choosing water is choosing a solid foundation. But the water starter's safety does not mean that it asks nothing of the trainer who chooses it. What the water starter demands is a different kind of attentiveness than the grass starter's tactical thinking or the fire starter's forward engagement. The water starter asks its trainer to notice the subtler strengths, the things that the type does not do loudly. Water is not a type that announces itself the way fire does. A water attack connects with the visual language of impact and spray, rather than the unmistakable communication of flame. The victory is real, but it is quiet. The water starter's trainer learns to find satisfaction in the completion of a strategy rather than in the dramatic expression of it. This is a different kind of satisfaction than fire provides. It is the satisfaction of something well done rather than something powerfully expressed. Squirtle's careful observation, Totodile's physical enthusiasm, Mudkip's sensory awareness, Piplup's pride, all of these are different versions of the same underlying quality in water-type starters. They are all, in their own ways, creatures that understand their own specific relationship with what they are capable of. The secondary types that some starters carry add layers of meaning that extend beyond simple mechanical variety. When a starter carries a secondary type, it changes the story of what that creature is and where it came from. Bulbasaur's poison secondary type, present from the very beginning, is one of the more unusual choices in starter design. Poison is not typically associated with the gentle, nurturing qualities of the grass type. It adds something harder and more defensive to the overall picture. The combination suggests an origin in environments where growth required active protection, where the abundance of plant life coexisted with predation and competition that had to be deterred. The steel secondary type that Empoleon eventually carries is perhaps the most dramatic secondary type addition in the starter lineup, changing not just the typing profile, but the essential character of what the creature is. Something in the evolution from Piplup to Prinplup to Empoleon involved a qualitative change in the physical substance of the creature, not just growth, but the introduction of something that was not previously present. The ghost typing of both Decidueye and Skeledirge represents a different kind of secondary type, one that introduces a thematic quality rather than simply a mechanical one. Ghost types in the Pokémon world occupy a liminal space between presence and absence, between the fully material and something that exceeds materiality. Both Decidueye and Skeledirge connect to this liminal quality in ways that complement their grass and fire foundations rather than contradicting them. The fighting type that appears across several starter evolutionary lines, most notably in Blaziken, Infernape, Emboar, and through other lines in various forms, reflects something that the game designers recognized about the relationship between physical strength and elemental power. Fire and fighting are a natural combination, not just mechanically but conceptually. Fire that has been internalized and expressed through physical movement rather than simply projected from a distance creates a particular quality of engagement. The creature that kicks with fire-wrapped feet, that strikes with burning fists, is not simply a fire type with physical moves. It is something that has integrated the elemental qualities so completely that it becomes indistinguishable from the physical self. This integration is visible in all three fire and fighting starters in how they approach battle. Blaziken's kicks are fire and impact simultaneously. Infernape's fluid movements are fire and motion as one thing. Emboar's strikes are force and heat as a unified expression. None of them use fire as a separate tool launched from outside the body. The fire is what the body is doing. This integration makes them different in kind from fire starters whose fire is external, like Charizard's breath or Typhlosion's collar. Those creatures generate fire and project it. These creatures move as fire. The distinction matters to how the battles feel and to what they communicate about the evolutionary development of fire within the lineage. The dark typing that arrives with Shiftry, the final evolution of the Seedote line from Hoenn, is not a starter secondary type in the direct sense, but it represents an evolutionary path available within the regional Pokémon ecology that parallels the starters in interesting ways. The starter lines in Hoenn remain pure typing through most of their evolution, but the world they exist in contains grass types that develop in very different directions. This context around the starters is part of what makes each regional selection feel specific rather than universal. The same elemental types are chosen in each generation, but the ecological community in which those types exist varies significantly. The grass type in Hoenn coexists with grass types that carry darkness and steel and water. This diversity in how a single type can develop reinforces that the starters are not the only possible expression of their types. They are specific expressions, chosen for specific reasons. The fire type in Hoenn coexists with fire types of entirely different character, volcanic creatures, and small flame-based insects and creatures that use fire defensively rather than offensively. Torchic and its line represent one way of being a fire type in Hoenn, surrounded by others that choose completely different approaches. Understanding this context deepens what makes the Torchic line's particular approach distinctive. Water in Hoenn is everywhere, which means that water types are more varied in this region than in any other. Mudkip and its line represent one specific relationship with water in a region where that relationship can take dozens of different forms. The starter lines of each generation also contain within them a kind of argument about what the most important qualities of their element are. Not all grass types agree on what being a grass type fundamentally means. Not all fire types express fire in the same way. The starters were chosen to represent specific arguments within each elemental category. Bulbasaur's argument for grass is that growth is the essential quality, that the accumulation of living matter over time, absorbing and converting and storing, is the heart of what the grass type is about. Chikorita's argument is that nurturing and care are the essential qualities, that the grass type is fundamentally about tending and restoration. Treecko's argument is that movement through the living world, the agility of a creature that belongs to the plant environment rather than simply inhabiting it, is the core quality. Each subsequent grass starter adds another argument to this ongoing conversation. Turtwig says that stability and anchorage are essential to the grass type. Snivy says that composure and the unhurried confidence of something that will outlast everything is the heart of it. Chespin says that protection and the willingness to stand between danger and those who cannot protect themselves is fundamental. Rowlett says that silence and the ability to move through the natural world without announcing oneself matters most. Grookie says that joy and rhythm and the connection between music and growth is what the grass type contains at its center. Sprigatito says something about performance and the way that living things draw energy from being seen. Together, these arguments form a picture of what the grass type is that is richer and more complex than any single entry would suggest. The fire starters make their own collective argument across 9 generations. Charmander says that fire is vital energy, something tied so closely to life that its absence would mean the end of living. Cyndaquil says that fire is interior and reserved, something developed in private and expressed in specific moments of necessity or engagement. Torchic says that fire is hidden warmth, something that looks soft until it does not. Chimchar says that fire is generated by life itself, by the metabolic processes of a living organism rather than by external combustion. Tepig says that fire is sincerity, something that expresses what it is without concealment or performance. Fanakin says that fire is focused will, something that becomes more precise and more purposeful as it is developed through intelligence, rather than simply through intensity. Litton says that fire is personal and private, produced through intimate biological processes and revealed on the creature's own terms. Scorbunny says that fire is athletic, that it lives in movement and in the specific quality of effort applied at speed. Fuecoco says that fire is ease, something that arrives naturally without requiring urgency or struggle. The water starters make a similarly varied collective argument. Squirtle says that water is patient and structural, something that accumulates and applies pressure over time. Totodile says that water is enthusiastic and physical, that it meets the world with the full weight of engagement. Mudkip says that water is sensory, that it knows the world through contact and vibration in ways that other media do not allow. Piplup says that water is endurance and pride, something that persists under conditions that would diminish or extinguish less resilient things. Oshawott says that water is skill, that it is developed and refined and expressed through something practiced and mastered. Froki says that water is precision and serious attention, something that waits in silence and then moves with absolute accuracy. Poplio says that water is performance and perseverance, that it can be shaped and worked and made into something beautiful through practice. Sobble says that water is sensitivity, that it is emotionally permeable and deeply attuned to the states of things around it. Quaxley says that water is propriety and structure, that it moves in correct ways, and that correctness is itself a kind of strength. The move pools that starters develop as they grow contain within them a curriculum of sorts, a progression through different qualities and capabilities that teaches the trainer who pays attention something about what the Pokémon fundamentally is. Bulbasaur begins with tackle and growl, the most basic expressions of physical presence and defensive posturing. Then Vine Whip arrives, introducing the reaching quality that will define so much of what follows. Then sleep-inducing spores, the ability to change the state of something at a distance without contact. Then the recovery moves that allow Bulbasaur to sustain itself. The move pool tells a story about a creature that begins by standing its ground and gradually develops more sophisticated ways of managing the world around it. Charmander begins with scratch and growl, then Ember, the first flame, small and direct. Then Smokescreen, introducing misdirection alongside power. Then Dragon Rage, which suggests that the fire in Charmander connects to something older and more primal than a simple warmth. As the line develops, the moves expand into the high-intensity fire techniques that Charizard is capable of, as well as the flying moves that arrive with the wings. Each new capability is a logical development of what was already present. Squirtle begins with Tackle and Tail Whip, then Bubble, water made gentle and exploratory. Then Withdraw, introducing the shell's defensive capability as something the Pokémon actively uses rather than simply possesses. Then Water Gun, the first directed application of water as force. The progression is from passive possession of the shell to active management of both defense and offense, mirroring the developmental arc of the entire line. The nature of starter Pokémon in the context of Wonder Trade and the modern games has added a layer of complexity to what it means to choose a starter. In current games, starters from previous regions can be obtained through various means, traded between players, carried forward from earlier games, encountered in certain post-game areas. The starter you begin with is no longer the only starter you can ever have. This change has not diminished the significance of the initial choice. If anything, it has clarified what that significance actually is. When players now choose a starter, they are not choosing the only members of that type they will ever have access to. They are choosing the specific creature that will stand at the beginning of this particular journey. The exclusivity is gone, but the firstness remains. The starter retains its special status, not because it is irreplaceable in a mechanical sense, but because it carries the emotional memory of the beginning. A Bulbasaur obtained through trade after the game has already begun is not the same as a Bulbasaur chosen in the laboratory before the first step was taken. The Pokémon might be identical in every statistical and genetic sense. The relationship is not. This distinction between a Pokémon as a game asset and a Pokémon as a companion with a history is one of the more quietly profound things that the starter system has been demonstrating across the franchise's entire run. the value is not in the rarity. The value is in the beginning. The Pokemon games have occasionally allowed players to choose a starter from a previous region as a second starter, or to receive additional starter Pokemon through specific in-game events. The reactions of the player community to these moments are instructive about what starter Pokemon mean. Now, when a second starter is offered, players often describe a specific kind of decision-making process that is different from the initial choice. The initial choice is made in the context of not yet knowing the world. The second choice is made with the awareness of what has already been experienced, of what the first starter has meant, of what qualities might complement or contrast with what is already present in the team. This second choice often reveals what the first choice established in terms of values and preferences. A player who chose Charmander at the beginning and now chooses Squirtle as a second starter is perhaps recognizing that the patience and defense they appreciated as a counterbalance to Charmander's intensity is something they want to develop more explicitly. A player who chose Bulbasaur and chooses Torchic as a second starter might be drawn to the contrast between the quiet accumulation of the grass type and the explosive expressiveness of the fire type. The second starter choice is informed by the first in ways that the first choice could not be informed by anything, and this makes it, in its own way, a different kind of meaningful decision. The experience of reaching a starter's final evolution for the first time carries a specific weight that other evolutions in the game do not quite replicate. Other Pokemon on the team evolve through the journey, and their evolutions are satisfying and often exciting, but they do not carry the same feeling as the starter's final evolution. The starter's final evolution feels like a completion of something that was promised at the very beginning. When the Pokemon that was small and new at the start of the journey becomes Venusaur or Charizard or Blastoise or any of the other final forms, there is a sense that the journey itself has been validated. The creature that began here, carried through all of this, has become what it was always going to become. Their feeling is not simply about power or statistics, it is about witnessing the full expression of potential that was present from the first moment. The bloom that Bulbasaur's bulb was always building toward has opened. The flame that was small on Charmander's tail now roars. The shell that Squirtle wore has become something it can fire from. What was potential is now expression. What was beginning is now, if not complete, then at least arrived somewhere it was always heading. There is something in the way starter Pokemon games are structured across the franchise's history that reflects on how their designers understood the nature of beginning a journey. The three starters represent three different relationships with growth, three different answers to the question of how a creature moves through the world and develops its capabilities. But they also represent three different temperaments that a young trainer might themselves embody. The trainer who chooses the grass starter is making a choice about patience. The trainer who chooses the fire starter is making a choice about intensity. The trainer who chooses the water starter is making a choice about reliability. These are not simply game strategies. They are in some sense personality statements made at the beginning of something. The fact that the games do not tell the player which starter to choose, that the choice is left entirely open, is itself a statement about what kind of experience the games are offering. They are not telling you who to be. They are asking who you are in the small, quiet language of three Pokemon and a choice between them. Some players choose based on type advantages. Some choose based on aesthetics. Some choose based on which final evolution they prefer. Some choose based on which creature they feel most drawn to in that specific moment for reasons they cannot fully explain. All of these are valid approaches. All of them result in a beginning. The starter Pokemon of the franchise also tell a story about how game design itself has evolved across the decades. The simplicity of Kanto's starters, three creatures whose designs are clean and whose concepts are easily grasped, reflects the design philosophy of a time when the entire concept of a Pokemon was new and needed to be introduced clearly. Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle do not require explanation. They communicate what they are immediately. As the generations progressed, the starters became more conceptually layered. The Johto starters carried cultural references and thematic connections that rewarded deeper engagement. The Hoenn starters embedded ecological specificity into their designs in ways that careful players would notice and reward. The Sinnoh starters carried mythological resonance. The Unova starters carried contemporary cultural references. This increasing complexity reflects the increasing sophistication of the audience that had grown up with the franchise and now came to each new generation with expectations shaped by everything that had come before. The starters of later generations do not need to introduce the concept of a starter Pokemon. They can assume that understanding and build from it. Kanto's starters are the simplest because they were teaching the language. Later starters speak that language fluently and can express things within it that the earliest designs could not. The specific way that each region introduces its starters also reflects this evolution. In Kanto, the choice is made in a laboratory with minimal context, 3 Pokeballs and a professor, and very little ceremony. In later games, the starter choice is woven into a more elaborate introductory sequence that provides context for the region, for the journey, and for what the starters represent within that specific world. This increased ceremony around the starter choice reflects an understanding that the moment of choosing is one of the most important in the game and deserves proportional attention. The simple laboratory of Kanto was sufficient for introducing the concept. The more elaborate introductions of later generations are appropriate for a franchise that has had decades to understand what these moments mean to the people who experience them. The starters themselves, in some of the later games, are shown interacting with each other before the player arrives to choose. They are not simply objects waiting in Pokeballs. They are creatures with relationships to each other, personalities already present before the journey begins. This shift reflects a more nuanced understanding of what a Pokemon is and how the bond between trainer and Pokemon is something that the Pokemon also participates in rather than simply receives. The starter chooses the trainer as much as the trainer chooses the starter. This is not explicitly stated in most games, but it is implied by how the introductory sequences are constructed in the more recent entries. The creature that approaches you, that seems drawn to you specifically among the options available, is already expressing something about the relationship that will follow. What remains constant across all of this evolution in how starters are presented and how their designs are constructed is the fundamental simplicity of the promise they make. This creature will be with you from the beginning. It will grow as you grow. At the end of the journey, whatever it has become will be something that it became alongside you. That promise does not become complicated by layered cultural references or secondary typings or elaborate introductory ceremonies. It is present in all of them, even in the simplest versions, even in the 3 Pokeballs on Professor Oak's laboratory table. The promise is not about power or strategy or type coverage. It is about the specific quality of a beginning, of standing at the edge of something unknown with something living that has agreed its swayed in whatever way creatures agree to such things, to stand there with you. The grass starters have stood there quietly, carrying their potential inward. The fire starters have stood there warmly, carrying their intensity close. The water starters have stood there steadily, carrying their adaptability and attention. There is something worth noting about the specific physical scale of starter Pokemon in their first stages, which is that they are all small enough to be held. This is not accidental. A creature that can be carried, that fits within the circle of a person's arms, asks for a different kind of relationship than one that requires the trainer to look upward to make eye contact. Bulbasaur fits in the arms of a child. Charmander is small enough to be held close, its warmth felt directly against the body of whoever is carrying it. Squirtle's shell, smooth and round, is something that can be gripped. All of the starter Pokemon in their earliest stages maintain this holdable quality. Even the proudest among them, Piplup, Sneevy, Fennekin, are small enough that the holding is possible. This holdable scale creates a specific register of care. The trainer does not simply command, the trainer also protects. There is a physical vulnerability in the earliest stages of all starter Pokemon that invites this protective instinct that asks the trainer to understand that being responsible for something small requires a different quality of attention than being responsible for something large. As the starters evolve and grow, many of them pass out of this holdable range. Venusaur cannot be picked up. Charizard would not easily permit it. Blastoise has grown far beyond the scale of something to be cradled, but the memory of when they could be held is still present in the relationship, carried forward by the trainer, even when the physical reality has changed completely. The middle evolutions of starter lines occupy a particular kind of emotional space that the games rarely comment on explicitly, but that players often feel. The middle stage is neither the charming beginning nor the impressive completion. It is the awkward middle, the stage of being more than what it was, but not yet what it will be. Charmeleon is sharper and more difficult than Charmander. Ivysaur carries more weight and seems more serious. Wartortle has developed the signs of its eventual size without yet arriving there. These middle stages are often the least beloved in player communities, precisely because they do not have the clear emotional resonance of beginning or completion. But the middle stages have their own dignity if you spend time with them. They are where the actual work of development happens. The transformation from Bulbasaur to Venusaur does not occur suddenly in a flash of evolution light. It accumulates continuously in the body and character of Ivysaur, which is doing the daily work of carrying what it carries and growing what it grows. The middle stage is not a waiting room. It is where the development actually lives. Players who keep their starters in middle stage for longer than necessary, who delay evolution out of attachment to the current form or out of curiosity about what the experience of the middle stage offers, often describe finding something in that extended middle time that evolution bypassed. The middle stage is its own thing, not lesser than what came before or after, but different in a way that rushing past it forecloses. The Pokemon world's understanding of evolution, that transformation occurs across a lifespan in response to experience and growth, is one of the more interesting ways it diverges from the biological understanding of evolution as generational change across populations. In the Pokemon world, the individual changes within its own lifetime. What would take thousands of years in the biological sense happens in the Pokemon world in the span of a journey. This compression of developmental time changes what evolution means for the trainer who witnesses it. The evolution of a starter Pokemon is not an abstract generational event that the trainer observes at a historical distance. It is something that happens to a specific creature that the trainer knows personally in response to experiences that the trainer was part of. When Cyndaquil evolves into Quilava, it is not simply becoming a more powerful version of itself. It is responding to everything that has happened since it began the journey. The experiences that shaped the evolution were the same experiences the trainer shared. The evolution is, in some sense, a record of what the two of them went through together, expressed in the changed form of the Pokemon. This makes the evolution of a starter Pokemon a deeply personal event, rather than simply a milestone in the game's progression. The creature that changes is the creature you have been traveling with. The change reflects something about what that travel contained. The starter Pokemon of each generation are also, in a quiet way, an expression of what the designers valued at that specific moment in the franchise's history. The values visible in each generation's starters are not always explicitly stated, but they are readable in what the designs prioritize and what they let recede. The Kanto starters prioritize clarity. They are immediately legible. You understand what they are and what they are about without any delay. This clarity was necessary when the franchise was new and the concept of what a Pokemon was still needed to be communicated. The starters were teaching the visual and conceptual language of the series, and they taught it through designs that did not ask for interpretation. The Johto starters prioritize warmth. There is a gentleness in all three of the second generation starters that the Kanto trio, for all its appeal, does not quite carry in the same way. Chikorita, Cyndaquil, and Totodile each feel like creatures that were designed to be loved before they were designed to be powerful. The warmth they offer is the warmth of familiarity, of something that feels safe and known. The Hoenn starters prioritize complexity. Each of them contains more than initially visible. Treecko's cool conceals competitive fire. Torchic's softness conceals intensity. Mudkip's simplicity conceals sophisticated sensory capability. The reward for paying attention to the Hoenn starters is discovering that what they appear to be is a beginning rather than a complete description. All of these values, clarity, warmth, and complexity, are present in all starter Pokemon to varying degrees. What changes across generations is which value is most prominently expressed, which quality the designers brought forward and centered when they sat down to design the three creatures that would stand at the beginning of a new journey in a new world. As the night deepens, and these stories settle into whatever quiet place the mind carries them, it is worth resting for a moment with what all of these starter Pokemon share across 9 generations and 9 regions. Each one was designed to stand at the beginning of something. Each one was chosen to be the companion for a journey whose length and difficulty were not yet known. The grass starters carry the quality of growth, of patience, of drawing strength from the environment and returning something to it. They begin quietly, and they accumulate. Their strength is not dramatic in its expression. It is thorough. It is there when needed because it was there the whole time, building slowly in the background. The fire starters carry intensity in many different forms. Some burn from the outside, some burn from within. Some conceal their fire until the moment it is needed. Some perform it for the appreciation of others. But all of them share a relationship with an element that does not allow half measures. Fire is present or it is not, and the fire starters each found a different way to be present. The water starters carry the adaptability of something that takes the shape of its container without losing what it fundamentally is. They move between environments. They change how they express themselves as conditions require. But something essential in each one, the careful observation of Squirtle, the enthusiasm of Totodile, the pride of Piplup, the vulnerability of Sobble, persists through every stage of development. There is something in the design of starter Pokemon that has remained consistent across all 9 generations, even as the specific creatures changed and the regional context shifted. The starters are always small at the beginning. They are always capable of becoming something significantly larger than they started, and they are always chosen in a moment of not yet knowing what they will become. This is the nature of beginnings. What stands at the start of a journey does not yet fully know itself. The bulb on Bulbasaur's back is closed. The flame on Charmander's tail is small. The shell on Squirtle's back fits comfortably without requiring accommodation. Everything that these creatures will eventually become is already present, simply not yet expressed. The patient observer who has spent this evening resting with the details of all these starters has perhaps noticed something about how the designs were made, and what they were made to communicate. The designers of these creatures were thinking about first meetings. They were thinking about what kind of creature a new trainer would look at and think, yes, this one, and then build everything that followed from that moment. Each starter was a door, and each door led to a different kind of story about what it means to grow alongside something, to be responsible for something, to discover through the keeping of a promise that you made to a small creature on the first day of a journey what kind of person you were becoming while you walked. The starters of all 9 generations, from Bulbasaur walking steadily beside its trainer in Kanto to Sprigatito demanding attention in Paldea, share this quality of being the first companion, the first responsibility, the first bond formed between a trainer and the world they were stepping into. What makes a starter irreplaceable in the experience of playing these games is not the type matchup or the final evolution statistics or the competitive tier placement. It is the particular story of that specific beginning. It is Charmander's tail burning through rain. It is Chikorita placing itself between danger and the person it decided to trust. It is Sobble pressing against a surface and becoming invisible when everything became too much. These are not simply facts about fictional creatures. They are the emotional texture of 10,000 different first journeys, each one real to the person who made it, each one remembered in the specific details of which starter stood at the beginning and what happened because of that choice. The starter Pokémon have always been a kind of promise. Here is a creature. Begin. The game asks nothing more and nothing less than that in the moment of choosing. The complexity arrives later. The bonds deepen over many routes and many battles and many evenings spent with the party resting at the inn. But the origin is always a simple thing. A small creature, eyes open, waiting. What each starter does with waiting is different. Bulbasaur waits with patience. Charmander waits with warmth. Squirtle waits with attention. Chikorita waits with affection. Cyndaquil waits with quiet interiority. Totodile waits badly, which is its own kind of charm. Treecko waits with cool assessment. Torchic waits with warmth that conceals heat. Mudkip waits with awareness. Turtwig waits with the stability of something rooted. Chimchar waits with active curiosity. Piplup waits with pride. Snivy waits with serene composure. Tepig waits with earnest warmth. Oshawott waits with the particular concentration of something practicing. Chespin cannot quite wait, but its impatience is genuine. Fennekin waits with selective reserve. Froakie waits with serious attention. Rowlet waits in silence. Litten waits with concealment. Poplio waits with determination beneath performance. Grookey waits while drumming. Scorbunny cannot wait either. Sobble waits with anxiety that fills the space around it. Sprigatito waits and watches to see if it is being watched. Fuecoco waits with complete ease. Quaxley waits precisely, correctly, as one should. All of these small ways of waiting at the beginning of things are the substance of what makes a starter a companion rather than simply a starting piece. The waiting has character. The beginning has a personality. The first step is taken by 2 things together, the trainer who is not yet a trainer and the starter who has not yet begun to become what it will become. This is the heart of it, not the final evolution or the competitive build or the type coverage. The heart of it is a small creature in a moment of beginning, carrying everything it will ever be in a form that has not yet fully expressed it, standing at the edge of a world it is about to know. The grass and the fire and the water will grow alongside whoever chose them. The bulb will bloom. The flame will rise. The water will find its path. These things were always going to happen. The only question was when and with whom. Let that thought rest here as the evening quiets. Let the starters settle into the long, slow peace of the hours when nothing is required and nothing is asked, and everything that was waiting in potential is simply allowed to be what it is, for now, unhurried, whole. There's another quiet evening waiting on the other side of this one. Let it come when it comes. For now, this is enough.